Hypocrisy.
Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to Lawsplaining the Interwebs. I am your host, Nick Ricada of Ricada Law, a small law firm in central Minnesota. With me today is the unstoppable, inimitable Robert Barnes. How you doing, man?
Good.
It's been a minute.
Yeah, I think last time was Candace when she was libeling other people.
Right.
When she was back on the Macron conspiracy. Now she just figured, hey, maybe she's judgment proof when that case is done. So, hey, let's just libel everybody.
Just think, the last time we talked, Brigitte Macron was still a man.
Exactly. Oh, it's been, I kind of saw that coming and been trying to encourage, some people to, I was trying to say, steer clear a little bit. Candace is going in a certain direction that's, I don't think, going to be sustainable long term. And then they got to see it in full display in other arenas.
She's an odd duck, man. I don't know. Like, I don't want to talk bad about her, but I don't know how to talk good about her either. Like, because she's never been my cup of tea.
Yeah.
And my favorite Candace Owens moment, though, was and I know some people are gonna be like, why are you bashing Candace right from the start? It's like, wait till halfway through the show. No, my favorite Candace Owens moment was when Crowder turned down the Daily Wire thing, and you watch her in real time go, I got out negotiated so hard.
Well, remember, I think we predicted at the time, because we covered the Crowder dispute, covered all that, and the ended up more right than a lot of the other people who were out there. But we were covering Candace, and I even proposed, and I was like, okay, she just figured out she needs to get out of the Daily Wire contract.
Yep.
I was like, what? How do you get out of the Daily Wire contract that's run by Ben Shapiro? I don't know. Maybe start attacking the Jews. and she did get out of that contract, built a big brand of her own accord, using the Macron story to do so, and then bridged that into the Charlie Kirk, into sort of being on the anti-Israel right, and she hit perfect timing for that. If this was like 5 years ago, it would have been marginal, but now was, even Nick Fuentes getting blown up because people were looking for a Israel skeptical view on the right.
Yeah,
and then she parlayed that into the Charlie Kirk conspiracy theory, and I think she thought she was like Oprah meets Alex Jones, and the problem was she was just real sloppy with her sourcing. And the putting, like obvious liars on and bragging about them and so forth. It was like, this is not going to probably turn out too well. And she just went down that path. I mean, she knows she's independently wealthy for life, because even if she gets big judgments against her, it doesn't matter, because her husband is his father is a British lord. So she knows she can do it kind of whatever she wants.
Yeah. And it's like, it's a good place to be, because she can, depending on how they're structured, like she can take the judgments against her and the business and just fold it if she has to. Not saying she necessarily will. I mean, maybe she'll beat everything. I still wonder, like, not to get down this rabbit hole, because we got more important stuff to talk about. We got Venezuela, but I still wonder about, a foreign head of state suing a private citizen.
That's wild.
Just because
it's almost as wild as kidnapping a foreign leader from another country and bringing him back for trial. Especially what I love is, hold on a second, isn't this the president that said presidential immunity covers criminal case? Oh, but so the Noriega case only litigated that partially. Never went off. Supreme Court never took it. There's only 2 cases about personal jurisdiction issues related to this. One from the 19th century, one from the late 20th century. And there were a lot of dissents in those cases along the way up the judicial food chain. So
Right.
yeah, it wouldn't shock me if that issue gets re-examined. So there's a lot of interesting legal. There's the Second Amendment implications about the gun charge. How far does that go? Especially now that it goes globally. I mean, that you're head of an army when we accuse you of a crime, boom, we now have a gun charge, which, by the way, is 30 years. That's how long that gun charge is.
It's just, it's just a little one. or
Yeah,
whatever.
exactly. Well, I mean, you know what it's like to be falsely accused of having guns connected to other things. So
I
it's
do.
not like the government doesn't have a little history of doing this kind of thing. But yeah, I think that, and there's a lot of interesting constitutional issues of international law, issues of whether there is international law. There's the statutory issues. I mean, there'll be some stuff we agree on, that even the good vice president, Yale law grad, and all, apparently thought U.S. arrest warrants were executable around the world, which would be
Right.
news to me.
Which is, that's not the case. Although I do have a question about that. And so how I've been thinking about how to structure this all day. Like, how do we do this decision? And just so you guys out in the audience know, we have about 80 to 90 minutes with Robert Barnes tonight. And he's welcome to stay as long as he's able. But I was running a little behind today. I'm sorry. So things got a little bit off to a slower start, but we're gonna abuse him while he's here. I was wondering how to set this up, and I think my first question is, do you think this action, just in concept, is legally sound? Like, is there a case where the United States can go in to Venezuela? And I don't want to use hypothetical states. I don't want to use anything else. Let's use Venezuela and Maduro. The U.S. can go in and grab him in the dead of night like we did. Do you think there is a place in which that happens? And if there is, how do we get there?
I think my view is generally about individuals and states, that we should have the same legal principles applicable as to things like self-defense and aggression and, trespass or kidnapping or lawful excuse for imprisonment, so on and so forth. I want the same standards. That isn't always the case with how it's actually applied, but I've never believed the government should have more rights of self-defense than I do.
Sure.
So in that context, it would be the self-defense analysis. And this would be true whether you looked at it under Article 2 of Commander-in-Chief power, whether you looked at it from an international customary law standard, whether you look at it as law between the states, whether you look at it as just Kogan's principles of universally applicable, that if Maduro presented an imminent risk, an imminent threat to the security and safety and lives of the American people, and that the only or most effective mechanism of muting that threat was an invasion and physical seizure of him as a person, then I think it would meet all of the standards. I think it would meet international law standards. I think it would meet various treaties. I think it would meet constitutional Article 2, because for imminent defense, you don't have to get congressional authorization or approval in advance. That's mostly agreed to. There's areas of disagreement, but even those that want the limited executive recognize that imminent security risks allow unilateral action by the President of the United States. But maybe you should go to Congress afterwards and so forth, get a ratification, if you will. But
Like
all of that is pretty well agreed. So I think if they were able to show that, like, Maduro was about to send a nuclear weapon or send something, some imminent risk of this individual to our peace, prosperity, and security, then I think it definitely suffices. Now, and think of through all the, like what Bronca goes through, all the self-defense standards. Is it imminent? Right. Is it proportionate? All of those things. I think if they had evidence of that, then that is when Article 2 power, in my view, was undisputably intended to apply. And international law says for self-defense purposes, you can absolutely do it.
Okay, so that makes sense to me. I think just kind of gauging, I've been watching what you've been saying on Twitter, all of it, of course, very astute and right up the alley. And I think I feel like we see this issue in a similar way. And for some reason, I've defaulted into the like defend the U.S. position, and I feel like you've defaulted into the prosecute the U.S. position, and like that's fine. Like that doesn't matter anything. So that's why I was asking you, like, from a legal perspective, do you think this is legally sound? Sounds like right now you say no, unless we were to be shown some sort of proof of an imminent threat to the safety and security of the United States. So that makes a ton of sense to me. I want to set that aside, and legality aside. Is it a good thing morally, or like in the global scheme of things, that we've gone and grabbed Maduro, we're going to arrest him, and we're going to do something to him? I mean, likely he's going to be prosecuted. He's going to be convicted of something, or Trump is going to pardon him and use it as leverage or something like that. Do you think this is a good step, ignoring the legality of it, or is this a big folly?
Yeah, in terms of the policy side of the equation, I think that there's several different layers of analysis, and a lot of it's yet to be determined. So, I know like on our board, there are about 1 in 5 people that were just undecided. A good number of people in the polling. It's relatively around the same numbers. And I think most of those people are not necessarily, I don't care or uninformed. It's people like, well, I don't know how this script is going to end. Now, my concerns from a policy perspective is a standalone principle, because I look at it from bifurcated 2 ways. The second aspect that I look at is politically, will its impact on domestic U.S. politics be, and will that remove a higher priority from the equation? Like I was giving the example that even if you believed it was illegal, that you could, there's arguments the Civil War was illegal, but you could make a moral policy argument that abolition of slavery was a greater cause. Now, there are actually necessity and justification defenses within the law that actually provide that to a criminal charge. They're really underutilized because the courts have gutted them so badly. But I've always thought those were robust defenses. It's like you make a traffic violation, but you do it to save somebody's life, right? I'm about to hit somebody, so I got to swerve without signaling. We want that person to swerve without signaling, not hit the person.
Of course.
So,
yeah, you want someone to get their kid to the hospital, even if they have to speed and go through a red light or two.
Exactly, bingo, or emergency pregnancy or whatever it is. So so that is actually built into the law, and I think there can be arguments for it, and a lot of it's going to depend on how it plays out. Now, my skepticism is twofold. Mostly, it's that the U.S. military and the Central Intelligence Agency, when they have recommended these kind of courses of action in the post-World War II era, have rarely worked to the benefit of the American people. And that's the primary filter. I mean, do I care about Venezuelan people in general? Yes. Are they secondary to the American people? Yes. I'm responsible for my family, my kin, my community first. That to me is what America first means. But do I want bad things to happen to the Venezuelan people? Of course not. Do I think we're responsible for the well-being of the Venezuelan people? No, I don't. So that's kind of the balance between those things. So I think from an American perspective, how will this impact the American people? I'm skeptical that it will lead to something positive. So the explanation that Vice President Vance proffered, aside from his, I think it was a Yale Law School, there was like a class that said, the CIA does it. It's always legal, everybody. So he might, in his excuse, he may have had that part of the course there. Since, for those that don't know, Yale was basically the founding institution for the Central Intelligence Agency. The old joke was if you heard a bunch of young men singing whipping poofs at some international cafe, they were all CIA members. That's the old old Yale song, or Yale singing group. So his explanation was this will lead to a reduction of the drug supply into the United States. I seriously doubt that will occur. Two reasons.
I hope not.
Go ahead.
No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
Yeah, exactly.
Joke.
The 2 reasons why I think that. One is we did run this script before, and now, granted, the real reason we removed Noriega had nothing to do with drugs, but that was the political excuse at the time. And after we removed Noriega, drug supply through Panama doubled. So it didn't go down. If you understand the Central Intelligence Agency's complicity in a lot of the drug trafficking and our political allies with the CIA and other high-ranking oligarchs in these Latin American countries and in the financial and banking sectors, they are deeply embedded in the narcotics distribution business.
I mean, the entire basis of the Schedule 1 marijuana that we've had for a long time, it's now Schedule 3. But the reason we Schedule 1 to marijuana under the Controlled Substances Act was to disrupt Latin American trade. And as well as impacting the Black community was like a side benefit. This is not like conspiracy theory. This is openly stated when they talked about the Controlled Substances Act and making marijuana illegal. Cocaine was the same thing. When they made cocaine illegal back in like the 20s is when it kind of started the push for illegality. It took a while to get it fully put into Schedule 2. But that was literally about disrupting cyclical the cyclical movement of cocaine across the southern border and disrupting the trade of Central and South America. Like those have been tools forever. And the insidious nature of the CIA is that seeding cocaine and its derivatives like crack, for example, into Black communities and low economic communities throughout low economic status communities throughout the 60s was to then, I guess, generate and foster this black market that would allow this level of dependence, indulgence, and then subsequently control. And controlling the drug trade has so much to do with who's in power in Central and South American countries. And it is a tool that the CIA has used to the benefit or detriment of the American people. It's a big mess. And in trying to pin down like where the benefit versus the, I guess, the fallout, where that lands on the spectrum is pretty hard to do. Like they're trying to manage something that's unmanageable.
Precisely. I mean, my view has long been on the drug war that it mostly will be used to deprive us of civil rights and civil liberties and justify foreign military interventions and regime change. And it won't reduce the actual problem of drugs in the United States to the degree that people consider it a problem. And we need to focus entirely on demand. That as long as the demand is there, the only countries in the world in the last century that have had consistent success with actually limiting drug supply have all been totalitarian societies. So yeah, Cuba can do a good job of limiting its drug and alcohol addiction problem by not allowing people to have any money to buy either, and by blocking it as an island and surveilling you 24/7, including your neighbor. I'm not willing to take that trade-off just to try to reduce the amount of drug use in the country. So
Right.
given that, I've always said demand needs to be the focus, not supply, because I don't think you can, there's no historical example of a democratic civil liberties society being able to radically reduce drug supply. They've been able to succeed in some countries and nations without becoming totalitarian in reducing drug demand by a wide range of creative programs. In that respect, Robert Kennedy has a bunch of ideas of his own as a recovering drug addict of his own that I think are good ideas. And I think that should be more the focus. It's convenient for the war on drugs. It justifies a huge police machinery. It just justifies effectively a militarized police force. It justifies deprivation of, they have violated more constitutional rights in the name of the drug war than any other legal effort by the federal government in the last century. And that's why I'm skeptical of that focal point, because it usually is counterproductive. It usually empowers gangs. It usually empowers dangerous gangs. Psychopaths and sociopaths control the distribution and production. You give them lots of money. You give them lots of tools of the trade, including weapons. And then they ravage their local communities and neighborhoods. So I just think it's a net negative. In fact, ironically, I started this debate when I was a high school kid at an evangelical Christian school. And we were part of the public debate, high school debate. I remember that back in the day.
Oh yeah,
that's where I learned to talk so fast. By the way, that was back. I don't know if you remember it. It was if you got in more arguments than the other side, you won. So everybody talked ridiculously fast.
It's not actually dissimilar to how internet arguments work in one function. Like, because internet debates are, you either get people who will bring up points and you'll actually go through a debate process, and that's rare because the internet really likes, a firestorm. And so what you actually get is people talking faster and louder until someone screams and someone calls out someone else a slur, right? And like the first one to get to the slur and have it be funny wins. And high school debates were similar. And I mean, the big problem with high school debates is most of the people in them don't know anything about what they're talking about. They get a debate card. It's like, let me absorb this tiny fraction of information and just spew back my best rhetoric around it. And so you build up technique rather than knowledge in them. But yeah, that is a technique that came through all of that.
We had these huge, binders of material with all these little cards with quotes and other stuff. And we ended up arguing the question was how to solve the problem of overpopulation of prisons. And our argument, and I got away with it the whole time. I was at Grace Baptist Academy. Was drug legalization.
Yeah,
but because if you dug into the data, there was overwhelming evidence pointing in that direction, that the incarcerating, mass incarceration was not reducing meaningfully the amount of drug demand and nor drug supply. And so and I just go back to, we remove Noriega, drug supply goes up. We got Pablo Escobar, drug supply went up. We got the Cali cartel, drug supply went up. We got El Chapo, drug supply has gone up. I mean, the only time drug supply goes down is when the U.S. military is removed from some place. When, like Afghanistan, the poppy seeds, the opium production dropped 95% the year the CIA was no longer in charge in Afghanistan. Similar out of Southeast Asia, you name it. I mean, it was just all of it. In fact, people want to know the whole history of cocaine if they're really super curious. A large amount of the cocaine traffic took off in the 1970s with Bolivia, Chile, and other regions. And the people running it, this was discovered actually by one of the great DEA agents who was assigned to Argentina at the time, who had been there from the beginning of the DEA's establishment. And he discovered that one of the key people that was involved was none other than Klaus Barbie. If you're thinking, that name sounds kind of familiar. Yeah, because he was the Nazi that the CIA helped smuggle out of Germany, who was a butcher and everything else. He was the one who helped organize and orchestrate. He saw this little, peasant farmers eating those nice little coca leaves and thought, there might be some potential here, and turned it up times 10. So, in fact, whenever a pro-American government regime change has been instituted in Middle, Central, or South America or the Caribbean, the drug distribution in the U.S. has gone way up. So that's why I'm skeptical that, at least as that part of Vance's argument, the first argument that Vance made was, well, it's just law enforcement. This was apparently our defense to the United Nations today. And it's like, sorry, JD, there's a warrant is only enforceable within the jurisdiction of the court that issued it. That's why go ahead.
Let me push back with the conceptual idea here. You're right. You can only enforce a warrant within the jurisdiction. And the problem with someone like Maduro as the head of state of Venezuela, and I know, like, I don't want to hear anybody in the chat, don't you dare bring up that he stole an election, it was rigged. I got it. But the guy running the country is the head of state until he's not running the country. And Maduro is running the country with the artifact of government. Like, so he is using it. He is the head of state. All right. Whether he should or shouldn't be, that can be all sorts of other discussions. But for now, he's the head of state, which means, though, that there's no way Venezuela, we have an extradition treaty, but they won't extradite Venezuelan nationals anyway. So we have someone who is not extraditable. Typically, if you're going after someone in a foreign jurisdiction, you have the cooperation of the jurisdiction. If it's a country, it's their State Department. If it's the state, if it's interstate, you contact the law enforcement in the other state, and they have a mechanism by which the courts can enforce a foreign subpoena or a foreign warrant. Like, that's something that can be done. But we have a necessarily impossible problem here in that Maduro is not going to turn himself in. There's also a concept in international law called universal jurisdiction, where we recognize that some crimes or some accusations are so atrocious that they merit jurisdiction in any place that will prosecute the crimes. These typically involve, deprivation of civil liberties on a massive scale, human atrocity. Is there a case to be made that while there is not a framework for international jurisdiction or international execution of a warrant, that universal jurisdiction applies to Maduro anyway, and then we are justified in executing the warrant for the crimes that we can, which would be related to narco-terrorism, drug trafficking, gun trafficking, potentially human trafficking, right? So we can indict him and prosecute him on these crimes. And if we bring him to the United States, we know because of Noriega that we don't really care how he gets in the jurisdiction. Once he's there, the courts will exercise jurisdiction over them. So is there a case to be made in universal execution of warrants for law enforcement purposes under something like universal jurisdiction? I know that that's not a framework that exists, but is it something that should exist?
So it'd be like I would consider only the just Kogan's principles something that could authorize universal jurisdiction of that kind. So and that would be things like genocide, things that are at scale, things that like Bibi Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, has been accused and indicted for.
Right.
I think legally, there is no, as you know, no current legal framework to enforce that in the current strut. You could go to the United Nations and say and try to have the United Nations make a decision that the person has to be removed, and then you're executing the United Nations authority. And Venezuela is a signatory to the United Nations, so you'd have an argument on those grounds. Another creative way to think of it, because this will come up in Noriega, that case was so rigged that they really just skipped through a lot of stuff.
To me, Noriega's a rapper. Like, that's it.
yeah, exactly. But it's the question of sovereign immunity. So I always reverse it and say, okay, let's say Afghanistan says Donald Trump was president and knowingly allowed massive heroin production out of Afghanistan, controlled by the U.S. military and the CIA. So Afghanistan and the Taliban chooses to indict him. Could they kidnap him and bring him to Afghanistan or seize him? I guess some people would say, Barney, what? He wasn't kidnapped. He was just captured. I'll remember the next time I kidnap somebody. You're not kidnapped. You're just captured. My instinct would be, wouldn't presidential immunity as we apply it here, wouldn't it apply? Like if we had let's say we took the same doctrine of presidential immunity we have here, which I interpret as more robust than the Supreme Court did. But let's assume for the sake of, and this will come up because the theory is that if you're the head of state, regardless of whether you're legitimate or not, this was litigated in France when they wanted to execute a warrant on Assad. And France said, look, we don't recognize him as legitimate. We don't recognize him as the legitimate leader. And the court said, it doesn't matter. He is in fact the leader. And the sovereign immunity doctrine applies to heads of state that says they can't be prosecuted for something they did as head of state, other than, as you know, the Just Kogan's Nuremberg trials that said the universal jurisdiction, universal application trumps all of that. I don't think drug distribution is a Just Kogan's violation, is my own take, or gun ownership while using drugs or distributing drugs would meet that standard. Now, some aspects of human trafficking could. They haven't alleged that. Go ahead.
They've alleged that he runs whatever that means, a violent cartel that is involved.
Have you seen how they watered that down? I was about to talk about how they watered that down in the indictment.
No,
it's now no longer a functioning cartel. It's just a patronage system of people who are paid to look the other way. Gotcha. That's the cartel. By the way, you know where they got the name Cartel of the Sun? The CIA created it in the early 90s in Venezuela. And it was named because they have a sun on their uniform. Yeah. So it was a CIA creation. People forget, who was it? I got confused earlier. I was on with Richard Barris. It wasn't Frank Thomas, but it was the other guy they called the godfather of drugs, African-American guy, I think from New Jersey or New York. 1970, he gets busted in Vegas. Sure. He gets let out on a secret deal with the judge. And then he disappears. Where he disappeared to was CIA connections in Venezuela. They never caught him. They never found him. He affected, because back then the Marseille connection, it did go through Cuba, and then Fidel kicked him out. That's the problem with the claiming commies are narcos. Generally, the commies don't trust the narcos. So long history of that. Same is true of Maduro. That's why the indictment's so weak. Because
narcos aggregate power, and communism doesn't tolerate competing power. Exactly. And narcos operate on a market economy. Like, whatever you want to criticize the black market, it is a market economy. It is almost purely demand driven, and the supply will always measure up to demand, and price is not. Price can be controlled, but if competition's allowed to flourish, I mean, you can always you can deflate prices pretty quickly. It's just a question of how much violence is someone willing to enact to return prices to equilibrium. So communists hate narcotics trade because it is an unregulated free economy, and so price and power and money aggregates the way we would expect it to. They hate that very, very
Exactly.
much.
It's,
They
it's
want to
not
control.
state controlled. That's why,
Right.
like, as a whole, Cuba, Soviet Union, these other places generally you haven't seen massive drug distribution, illegal drug operations, because they don't trust the people that are connected to it. They don't trust what it does because, like you said, it empowers a bunch of people, enriches a bunch of people, and for the states, like the Chinese Communist Party, they're fine exporting fentanyl to the United States or to Mexico and all the rest, but they keep a tight lid within the country, and even including on the triads, which still operate out of Hong Kong, but not at the scale they used to, because they're a threat to the state. Everything is about the state.
Right.
And anything, and that's why I was always skeptical of the allegations, because like the cocaine coming through Venezuela, it's about 5 to 7% of the supply anyway into the U.S.
That was about how much I was doing.
Huh?
I said that was about how much I was doing. 5 to 7% of what was coming into the U.S.
Yeah,
came right to me.
So it in fact had gone down. The cocaine traffic through Venezuela had generally gone down under the Chavez and Maduro regimes, because if you just understand, they see these as threats. And they've got all these militia groups left and right up in the jungles that they don't have much control over. The last thing they want to do is give them more control or more power or more money or more guns or more manpower. And so that's why they're always going to keep it tight. I mean, like right now, one of the biggest distribution points that they don't want to talk about is Ecuador. Ecuador, because we have one of our aligned people who are in control there, it's running an open spigot of drugs coming through Ecuador. Indeed, what I loved was I was like, I could imagine being in the Southern Command to take out a boat, and you know who the instructions were coming from the CIA, and they're like, oh, there's another competitor. Hit that boat, hit that boat, hit that boat. So because of the, studied the drug trade for a long time, I'm just deeply skeptical of, so I don't think our warrant is enforceable there directly. I don't think drugs rises to the level of a Just Kogan's universal standard. I don't think the Vance's hope that this will reduce drug use in the United States will actually translate in that way. And those are the only explanations he's proffered. Now, the explanations that I love Trump, for one thing, his unmasked honesty. There's no, hey, let's have elections, let's have free democracy, let's do 4 freedoms or any of that stuff.
We'll run it for a while. We'll do it better than they did, frankly.
Yeah, exactly. Instead, it's, no, we're here for the oil. What are you talking about? What are you guys talking about? Narc? Whatever. No, oil. We want the oil. It's ours. We want it. We want to take it.
And so that brings me into kind of where to transition this, because I don't buy the drug narrative. I mean, the indictments are some sort of reason and justification. The question I have is, do we need justification to do this at all? And I want to ask that in 2 parts. Does Trump internally need any legal justification other than what he did? And my assertion is, I don't think he does. I don't think Trump violated his presidential powers in carrying out this operation. Now, we may go in and determine that Trump did not face an adequate threat to the safety and security of the United States people. We may go in and determine Trump was wrong when he decided to execute this, but he has asserted that Maduro is a threat to the United States, and he's done so through the guise of narco-terrorism and the war on narco-terrorism, which is justifying the Venezuelan boats, and will likely justify some sort of action in Colombia in the very near future. Whatever that is, I'm not sure, but that's kind of where I think we're headed. Is Colombia's got a microscope on it. So I know that he's set it up as narco-terrorism as justification. They're assaulting the United States, and he is now tasked with defending it. We may have a judge come in and say, or even the Supreme Court come in and say, Trump is wrong. We don't have the justification, no WMDs or whatever. But his action in the now would be protected by sovereign immunity. So is Trump exceeding his authority here to do this? Like, let's just go ahead and take him at his word. He's defending the United States. Does he have to go to Congress to do this? I don't think he does.
It depends on what the justification is. So I think that so my view of Article 2 and Article 1 and its interaction. So Article 2 gives the president power as the commander-in-chief. Article 1 says any act to declare war must come with congressional approval and authorization.
I wanted to
I am
talk
not.
to you about
Sorry,
the
go ahead.
declare war. Sorry, I wanted to talk to you about the declare war thing. So I want to pin that because I want to go back to it, but I didn't mean to interrupt you. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. So if there was an imminent risk to which the only proportionate response was invasion and seizure, then I believe he's acting within his commander-in-chief responsibilities. I haven't seen sufficient evidence to date that that was the case, at least in terms of imminence of risk. So then the question becomes, constitutionally, there are those that have want to expand Article 2, and they would use the historical precedent that since World War II, it is many presidents have used military force outside the United States without a declaration of war or authorization of military force from Congress. Now, that to some degree is slightly overstated. We did get the Gulf of Tonkin resolution for Vietnam. We did get authorization of use of military force in Iraq both times. And they used the authorization of
and it was expanded in 2004 or 2008. I can't remember.
Correct. Basically, just put the word terrorism on them and you're ready to go.
Right.
Though there were some limited countries in that regard, and Venezuela was not initially included in those countries. So I understand that argument from sort of historical custom and practice. My own view is I want Congress to be forced to approve any declaration of war or use of military action outside of the United States unless it meets that imminent risk self-defense category. So that's my view. So that's one view that people disagree on. The reason why I have that view, one is you can make a textual argument from the Constitution itself. You can make an argument about early historical practice. So, for example, even when we went after the Barbary pirates, we went and got congressional authorization for that before we used kinetic force. So there's a lot of evidence that, like, I see people.
Although, isn't there an argument? I guess Barbary pirates was Jefferson, right?
Jefferson and Adams.
Yeah, and prior to that, we had non-intervention in France and Spain versus England, following the American Revolution from George Washington, in which Washington is quoted like, "I don't have the power to go after, like, to do an offensive military action without Congress." But isn't there an argument to be made that Washington was just a giant pussy who didn't want to? I'm overstating that. But isn't there an argument to be made that, Washington used the convenient shield of Congress to not mire the United States following a brutal revolutionary war, a taxing war with a fledgling nation that's trying to get its economic feet under it, trying to get its people on board and trying to actually, remain a united force. That non-intervention was the right move just because we had to do our own nation building at home. And so that was a convenient shield for Washington, whereas Washington had no issue approving offensive military actions headed west and northwest, against native tribes that were considered sovereign in enforcing U.S. territory. We took offensive military actions without congressional authorization there. So isn't it a bit of a convenient argument to say that in the past, even Washington and these other guys waited for Congress? I mean, just because they did doesn't mean they had to.
Well, I think that leads to, because you have the textual argument, and that depends on how you define war, what you think it means in the constitutional context, the time of the
declaration of war specifically and what its purpose is, which I'm circling to that. I'm getting there.
Yeah. So there's that sort of textual debate, which you have at one level, and then the next level, and then you have the historical practice that was used in the early parts of the country. But then what my focal point in this regard is on what was the policy? What were they worried about why force Congress to be the sole source of declaring war? Why give the president commander-in-chief authority, but not give him any authority to declare war? And their concern, it's probably best summed up by the author of the Monroe Doctrine, which has been completely bastardized in the press. I do love Trump because he didn't claim it was the Monroe Doctrine. He said it was the Dunroe Doctrine. So it was a really unknown hidden doctrine. But
Dunroe Doctrine. Monroe, he could never get it finished. We got it done.
Yeah, exactly. But John Quincy Adams, wrote a great speech. And if you want some, people out there that are curious about the history of this, why did we put this in there in the first place? Or what was some of the animating principles and ideas behind it? So John Quincy Adams, he gave a great speech, July 4th speech, where he said where he really laid out probably the most articulate explication of why that provision is there, and in the general disposition of fear of war, fear of a standing army, fear the concentration of power, fear of one man getting to decide whether we go to war. He explained that the early founders came to believe that foreign wars were directly tied to empires, and that empires killed liberty at home. That was it wasn't because they had some generous view of the rest of the world, that they just wanted peace and prosperity and nirvana for the globe. It was because they said, once we go down that step
Right.
of we have a standing army, we have one man who can make unilateral decisions about military conflict, we start creeping into an empire, and empires kill, because this was their interpretation going back to history at the time. It's why they chose republic rather than democracy. The time they thought now this shifted historically by the time Abraham Lincoln was president and Andrew Jackson was president. There had been a shift in the historical understanding of Rome and Greece. But at the time of the founders, the focus was on Rome, and they really believed the Roman Republic collapsed because it became a military a foreign empire. Sure. And so they were like, how do you stop this? Well, one, you don't allow one man to make that decision unilaterally. You strip him of that power. He cannot, we were all not supposed to have a standing army. Second Amendment was supposed to make sure that the tools of violence of the state were kept in the individual. So there's some other things that sadly went south over the years. But it was really genius when you look at how it was originally crafted. If you could remove from centralized state power, the power of violence, the tool of violence, the means of violence, which is what the Second Amendment, in my view, was heavily intended to do. Not just to defend us against the state, not just defend us against other individuals, but to keep the state from ever having the tools of enforcing unilateral declarations of some political class. That, of course, has eroded over time. But putting that part aside, he explained that in order to build a constitutional republic, you have to not be an empire. In order to keep that republic, you have to not be an empire. That's why he gave one of the greatest quotes he happens to be like a family cousin of the Barneses going way back, the Addams family. Yeah, the Addams family of John and Sam, not the Addams family from the movie and the TV show. I know someone's going to use that clip somewhere.
Really weird too. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. But he said he goes, the difference with America is we're going to be this shining example of liberty to the world, but we're not going to go abroad searching for monsters to destroy. And under that understanding, the second aspect is what could restrain our war appetite. Now, is it going to be a perfect restraint? Absolutely not, as long history has shown, but it can be an restraint if you require a bunch of members of Congress to go on record. They've abdicated their obligation to declare war in multiple contexts, in my view, because they don't want to be held responsible. And that, in my view, guts what the Constitution was intended to do. So if it's a declaration of war, and we can get into that's a separate debate, to me, that still requires prior congressional authorization.
Now, I was reading, which I shouldn't ever do. And Hamilton in 1787, so pre-Constitution, is already downplaying the declaration of war as a tool of government. And then, of course, following Geneva and the creation of the UN, and then the refining of UN global treaty, basically over the subsequent decades, declarations of war don't make the same legal sense that they used to at the time of the drafting of the Constitution. Hamilton, and this goes right into what you're saying with empire building, right? Declarations of war were an actual tool to signal to the international community, hey, we're doing this for the purpose of expansion. Now, that's because the international community at the time was a group of empires. And it's like, we're going to this place to take it over, so you guys don't. It's like cable companies, right? And so England would tell France, hey, we're going into West Africa. And France is like, fine, we're in Algeria. We'll take that. And that was the purpose of a declaration of war. And so I agree with you that Congress should be involved in expanding sovereign territory through an act of war, but we don't do that anymore. So we don't really have declarations of war. So then I think we have to rethink what war is and means. Because I'll tell you, it's really easy for me to going into a foreign state and grabbing the head of state is an overt act of war. But I don't feel like we're at war with Venezuela today, like as we sit right now. Like, do you feel at war with Venezuela? Like, there's nothing.
Historically, a boycott that we're still imposing, an embargo of the kind we're imposing, has been considered an act of war, and that's still ongoing. The way I would look at it is I always try to do the reverse equation. Say, okay, if it had been, I always recommend this to people to. If you want to, motivation is the master of reason. Reason will never be the master of motivation. So if you want to improve your reasoning, shift your motivation. It's the theory and the premise behind the adversarial system and the practice of law. The idea is that if you're forced to align with a particular cause or part of the case, that will give you the best motivation to improve your reasoning to advocate for that side of the case, even if it might not be your original instinct to begin with. So I look at it as if they had done it to us, would we consider it an act of war? I think if we were currently embargoed on both coasts, we'd consider it an act of war. Definitely, if our president was seized overnight by an invader, I think we would call it an act of war.
Right, but under that premise, we're already at war.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, we've been at war for months.
Right.
And I would prefer part of it. I mean, you're right about the practical issue. Part of it is also from a policy. So I have my originalist understanding of the Constitution. I think this is required. Let's put that aside for the second. The policy reasons I favor this is I don't want America to be an empire. I want us to be a constitutional republic. And I do think being an empire, I think ever since post-World War II, we've slowly, steadily lost our liberties in this country. And I think it's direct, and a large part of our wealth, frankly. I mean, empire is supposed to bring wealth home, not send it everywhere else. But putting that secondary part aside, apparently Stephen Miller's objection to empire is only we're not getting enough of the wealth. I think this is Trump's, God bless it. And there's an argument for resource realism, which we can get into in a second about whether the oil will work or not. But before we bridge into that, I don't like the American empire. I don't like this huge military complex. I don't like this huge surveillance state. And so what would work that could at least possibly, and I always like to say, if there's usually a problem that you're suffering legally or politically, there's often an answer in the Constitution or Bill of Rights at some level that we could build from. And what's one of those answers? Make Congress always have to authorize it first. Don't allow us to go in without a full, robust public discussion and debate of the evidence. Maybe then we pull back a little bit on that empire. Now, we can also massively cut spending and massively cut the federal government. That would help too. But that's part of my policy proclivities against these efforts and to constitutionally compel this. Now, practically speaking, you're right. One, Congress has abdicated from it. Two, the global empires have all agreed with one another to basically dilute the meaning of declaration of war to begin with.
Yeah, nobody does it anymore. Like, we're not the only country that doesn't declare war. Almost no one does.
Russia's still in a special military operation in Ukraine. I'll give Putin credit. He learns from the West. He's like, oh, that's how you get away with this. It was like that's why when they went in, they had all of them do votes in the different regions. Do you want to be part of Russia or not? And he got that from the Europeans who did, and us who did that in Yugoslavia. We're like, no. It's okay to completely separate and secede as long as you have a vote in your jurisdiction. He's like, okay, so you can play at that game. We'll have our people vote. You guys said it was legally binding then, not legally binding now. So that's my policy predilection. Is and I understand the arguments for resource realism and all the rest. To me, once you start going down the path of the empire, your constitutional republic is on the clock and is not likely to last too long.
So does that make this a question of what we do with Venezuela going forward? Is this a point where the consequent either justifies or unjustifies the antecedent? Is it the antecedent or the precedent? Right. So the precedent. Yeah. So we go in and capture Maduro. But if we're not nation expanding, we're not empire building, right? So we go in, we institute regime change in Venezuela. And I'm not a fan of U.S. implementing regime change, but like Venezuela's on the list of ones that I really don't give a shit if we change or not. Like, okay, that's fine. But so we implement regime change in Venezuela, but we don't own it. We use it as leverage and negotiation for an extremely resource rich country that has valuable trade possibilities for us, if nothing else. We reestablish Exxon's ownership, or while the down the chain of ownership of Exxon, but their ownership of oil interests that they negotiated for and were nationalized. We get that back. So we make our American companies whole. We open paths to American prosperity through the action. Does that then say, well, this wasn't an act of war under the understanding, because we're not empire building. We're removing a volatile, controlling despot, and we're getting rid of him, and we're going to prosecute him in America and lock him up, I guess, which will be funny. Or we go in and under the traditional thing, we go in, we take the head of state, we take the capital, and we own the country at that point. But we don't seem to be doing that. So is there a post hoc justification that we're looking for? Like, is that how this works out? I don't know how to do this. And my whole point in all this is that I don't think Article 2 authority, and I don't think the Section 1 delegation of the war power, of the declaring war power to Congress, I don't think it's sufficient to handle this situation. I think we need to sort out what it is and then what it should be. So that's what I'm trying to figure out.
So I see a couple of different components there. I mean, there's
Sure.
the legal aspect, which we've addressed, and then there's the policy impact. And is it a good policy or not a good policy? And the devil will be in the details, I think, as to how it's judged down the road. Now, I think there's a range of consequences that flow from the precedent of it. In other words, we've now established or claimed that any nation can enforce its domestic laws by going and seizing a person from outside their country using their own military. We've said that's legitimate now. How are we going to rein that in? I'm very curious. But so there's that aspect of the policy ramifications. For example, people are saying this could never happen to Trump. It's like, there's a Democratic president. What if Afghanistan or some lefty government or other government, let's say Venezuela, indicts Trump for the actions on Maduro? Does anybody think a Democratic president wouldn't mind shipping off this person that they tried to indict and imprison and murder themselves off for extradition using Trump's own precedent? I mean, I think we can't rule that out. We've opened the door there in ways that I'm not sure everybody's thought about. Where does that lead? There are good roads that leads down and some troublesome roads that leads down. But separately, now I'll give you quickly my own view as to what's really happening. Then we'll get into the oil and resources and other aspects.
Sure.
The main focus for Rubio is to cut off Venezuelan oil support to Cuba, because he really doesn't care about Caracas. His whole goal is it's a family obsession. He comes from Cuba. His father's fled from Cuba, all the rest. And the whole Cuban community in South Florida. They think if they cut off Venezuela from Cuba, and Lindsey Graham was bragging about this on Air Force One today with President Trump, then Cuba will fall on its own, because it won't have its critical oil coming in. I think they've misjudged a certain other country in the East that could provide that oil, but they're hoping, I guess, they don't restore their relations there. But and then the second aspect of it is you're talking about corporations made whole. It's actually one man. So in 2024, Paul Singer, hedge fund, who had, by the way, spent the prior 10 years trying to derail Trump, help launch Russiagate, all the rest. But he suddenly changed course late in 2024 after backing DeSantis and gave, there's different reports, but up to $50 million to the Trump campaign. What was his sudden interest? Well, he was the one who went in his hedge fund, bought all of that corporate debt, all the government debt by Venezuela owed to these corporations.
Sure.
So he bought it for like $7 billion, and it's worth at least 22 billion. He's going to get about 50. I think Trump's goal isn't I'll get into the oil issues. I think Trump's goal is honestly help Rubio take back Cuba and help a huge donor get about a $15 billion check. I think this is why he was like, let's not worry about elections and all this stuff and this Machado lady. Let's not worry about all that. Let's not get in bed with these crazies and the oligarchs that are in Venezuela that want to restore their power. And he's like, let the woman who's now president is one of the co-indictees, by the way, in the Maduro case. But he thinks what he can do.
Come get you too. Don't worry about it.
Exactly. And what he's going to pitch is, look, I'll soften the sanctions. You guys pay off this debt. Pay off this debt. Put in a plan to pay off the debt, and it's all done. So I think that's what Trump's goal is. I don't think he plans on U.S. He talked about we're not afraid of boots on the ground. Yes, he is. He doesn't want boots on the ground. He doesn't want to be. He doesn't want to be in the colony business. You talk about, we run Venezuela. He means through the Chavista government that they will now deliver certain things to his key donor groups, deliver things to Rubio, no more oil, discounted oil to Cuba, and now he may believe that. I think Singer's the one he's been talking to, because the problem, there's two issues with Venezuela's oil. One is about 95% of it is fake. So you see these huge 5 trillion, whatever it is, in reserves. Chavez made that up about 15 years ago. So I recommend people go back to look at what Venezuela said its reserves were in 1993. Chavez massively boosted it because he thought it'd be attraction to get Chinese and Russian investment. It never worked, by the way, because they felt they saw through it. They're like, this is not really there. That whatever oil is there, that Chavez is talking about is so difficult and costly because it's a unique form of oil. It's heavy oil, very difficult to extract, very difficult to refine. And the reason, like, one thing is, I didn't understand why Trump didn't take this deal, but maybe it was the Cuba connection. I don't know. The Maduro in this regime, the reason why people were like, why did the Chavista regime clearly give up Maduro? Because they didn't use their air defenses, didn't use any of that. There was no military outside. It was just his Cuban guard that just got taken out and then him removed. I think the reason is because Chavez made a huge mistake. In 2007, he kicked out what he told was the U.S. companies is, we're now going to be a majority ownership. You can still be involved, but you have to take a minority share. And they were like, no, thank you. We're out of here. And then they sued in international arbitration pursuant to their old contracts that they got under honestly dubious grounds from the Venezuelan government back in the day, 1936 and so forth, through 1976 when they nationalized the oil supply.
Right.
But they kept these contracts in place. And that's how they have the judgments, that some of which has already been enforced by the $2 billion bullion gold, which is probably worth about $12 billion, by the way, today, in the City of London Bank. They just seized it and kept it. But they still have this excess judgment out there. But the problem was oil production collapsed. That one, China, Russia, nobody bought. I mean, Exxon still does business down there, but nobody bought that this was really financially feasible, develop any time soon for most of the oil supply there. And he caused so many companies to leave, and so many of the professionals left. There was even a left populist documentary made about how he betrayed the oil workers down there, because all of a sudden they no longer had the competency, capability. And then the U.S. put sanctions that further prohibited their ability to get the necessary equipment in. And so you've got all this rusting equipment. They're producing like 25% of what they were producing 20 years ago. So Trump kind of knows this. The general estimate, people can find Bloomberg, other people in the oil industry. They've all said that's a 10-year dream, pipe dream, and it's probably never going to happen. Now, they do have some rare earths. They do have some gold. They do have some other things, but rare earths are very expensive to refine, very environmentally costly. You have to deal in where those rare earths are located. A lot of different militias are located throughout all those jungles. They haven't been able to control those jungles in 25 years. Colombia can't control their side of the jungles. I saw this is Patrick Lancaster, this war reporter who covered stuff in Ukraine, other parts around the world. He went down there to try to get to Venezuela. He got stuck in the jungle on the border. And you could see him. He was in this little hotel room. He's like, I got to get out of here. He was doing a live stream. He's like, I'm not supposed to be here. I'm not supposed to be here. So it was funny as the dickens. I mean, kind of funny, but probably not. Funny in the dark humor. Kind of.
But we can laugh at him.
Yeah, exactly. It's like whoever it was that thought they were going to get in on the 50 million bounty. And I'm sure the CIA did the same thing they did in Panama. People forget, before we went into Panama, actually a bunch of Panamanian armed forces seized Noriega in a deal with the CIA to give him over to the CIA.
Right.
And they went through it all, and the CIA stood down and let the other members of Noriega's crew come in, wipe them all out. The reason was because we wanted to wipe out the whole Panama military. But we have a history of promising. I suspect a lot of those Venezuelan guys that were stand down and expecting to get some of the 50 million probably just got summarily executed over the last 2 days. But it is what it is. You lay with the devil, then you're going to get what you get.
I always maintain that Central and South America is still like it's routinely one of the most, like, it's a beautiful place and they have wonderful people and culture, but it's simultaneously one of the most terrifying cultures that's around. Like a solid history of brutality coming back, pre-colonialization, and carrying on like to today. Some of the most depraved and horrendous acts of violence are carried out by cartels on a daily basis without batting an eye.
Because you gain power the more ruthless you are.
Right.
So this is how, like, the gang that originated from Venezuela, the TDA, Tren de Agua, or however they pronounce, they learned early on that if they were more extreme than everybody else, they could quickly dominate. So if they took over, they took over the Aurora, Colorado building, terrorized everybody. They were terrorizing a whole bunch of people throughout Central and South America. There's a range of key gangs and militia groups that want TDA taken out, by the way. The Maduro government basically kicked them out. Some say he encouraged them to go to the U.S. You can take that however you like. Either way, he got reduced their influence in Venezuela. But because they learned that the more ruthless you are, this was actually kind of the old Hoover, J. Edgar Hoover. He never said this argument explicitly, but why to do business with the mob? You want controlled crime rather than uncontrolled crime.
Right.
You want people who live within some metes and bounds. That when you
summarized Mexico right now, like present day Mexico, you can assume at least 50% of the government is cartel involved or owned, which means you can assume 100% is, because you can never know who is and isn't. And when people's disloyalty to the prevailing regional cartel comes up, they disappear pretty quickly. And so they, the Mexican government works with cartels like that. That seems pretty obvious, to affect policy. And, when the cartels are happy and the government and they are cooperating, the places that they're in are rather peaceful and they're rather calm and civil. And it's just like any other gang. They're just on a massive scale, right? Like they keep their people taken care of. They keep it quiet and peaceable as much as they can. It's only when the violence breaks out that it becomes a big problem. But I
used to vacation down in Bucerias, or I think it's called Bucerias. I can't pronounce the Spanish, despite my Spanish classes in school. I could read it, never could speak it, but I mispronounce English words, so it's all equal in the end. The beautiful little seaside town, little cobblestone streets, a lot of Canadian visitors and surfers. But I used to go there because it's in the heart. It's all surrounded by cartel country, and because of that, it was uber safe. Nobody robbed you because they didn't know if they were trying to rob a cartel member's house. So you could get a beachside house and it was as peaceful as you could get anywhere in the world.
Well, yeah,
you're absolutely right about that.
And yeah, and in those places especially, you don't want a dead American. And it's funny because like the cartels put out press statements when Americans die in cartel territory. They're like, we're going to find the guys who did this. We're going to skin them. Don't worry about it. It's like, calm down. So, but I did want to get back to something because you mentioned that this puts pressure on the United States internationally to justify these actions. But I don't know that that's accurate, right? For a couple reasons. And this is where I'd like to push back, is because one, I mean, I know it's feasible that a Democrat could extradite Trump. Like that could be something, but that's not quite the same, right? We're talking about coming in and basically attacking Camp David when the president is there and extracting him, right? Like, so some other country doing that. And the question I have, like, we would consider that war. We would consider that an assault on the United States. Who else is going to do something about it, though? Like, let's say Russia comes in, extracts a president from Camp David. Do we expect an allied group of people to go and actually enter war against Russia? And as much as our alliances are on paper, the bigger the opponent, the less likely that is, right? And so then, and similarly, the smaller both players are, the less likely that is as well. I mean, if Ivory Coast, like if they go in and take the president of Trinidad and Tobago or whatever, I don't think the community is going to come in and nuke Ivory Coast. Just like I don't think that the global community is going to come in and nuke Russia. So it puts me in this place of going, I mean, I see your point, and I do see that the US will have to argue with the UN, but at the end of the day, and I know this is a might makes right argument, and I hate that, but in international law, we're not subject to all of Geneva. We're not subject to UNCLOS. We're not subject to the international criminal courts. So there is no prosecutorial oversight of an American president. Like, that doesn't exist anywhere. So what do we have to worry about here?
So, I mean, I think from an international stage, they won't necessarily have to justify it. The question becomes whether other countries and nations over time see this as a precedent they themselves can utilize that ends up destabilizing the world in ways we don't necessarily find productive for our own peace and prosperity long term. Now,
Sure.
and this relates to because I remember getting in debates when I was explaining that the warrant's not, immediately enforceable outside the United States. And people kept pointing to me a couple of U.S. cases. This is a good transition to that. I litigated this because, and this goes to my policy argument also, in those cases, which I had a client that was illegally renditioned from Panama to the United States. It involved.
Let's quickly do this, because extradition and rendition are two different things, and people don't necessarily know. Extradition is done by treaty, an extradition treaty between two state entities, and those state entities agree. Your state entity will apprehend someone, and in that apprehension, they will then extradite and send this person to where they're supposed to go. If you're wanted for felony crimes in the United States, in most countries on the planet, I think we're in a majority of countries have extradition treaties of some sort. If you're an American, even if you're an American in Venezuela, they will arrest you in Venezuela, find out that you have a pending charge in the United States, and they'll ship you here. So that's extradition. Rendition is to take someone in a place where you don't have jurisdiction, or don't have obvious jurisdiction, I should say. You take that person and you bring them back to your home country. So you exercise the authority rather than the state that you're in. And then there's extraordinary rendition, which is what we did a lot of in Iraq and Afghanistan, which is where we grab someone in a foreign jurisdiction and move them to another foreign jurisdiction where there's either a more favorable set of laws, or maybe a more look the other way government, where we can host black sites like Finland and Sweden. I think we had black sites in those countries where we would bring Afghan or Jordanian militants, and we would bring them to these Nordic European countries. No one would know. So those are the three different things: extradition, rendition, extraordinary rendition. And in extradition, you work with another country, so or another state entity. That is not happening here. We effectively renditioned Maduro, but it's a little weird because we went into his national place. Extraordinary rendition tends to happen on battlefields and stuff like that, and this isn't that. So I want to clarify that. So your client was renditioned to the United States by the United States from somewhere else.
Correct.
Okay.
While there was a habeas proceeding pending in the Panama courts that they ignored, that was the added little legal complexity. So in the U.S., so traditionally, if you're extradited, the theory is that the U.S. court, or whichever court received the extradited defendant, the personal jurisdiction over that defendant is governed by the extradition. So, for example, if somebody gets extradited for bank fraud, the government can't then add charges for, say, mail fraud. That They can only charge what the extradition allowed, because the theory is the U.S. court has inherited that personal jurisdiction from the foreign court. So the question became, first time it reached the U.S. Supreme Court, it's in the late 19th century, was, okay, what happens if they weren't extradited, but somebody just went down and literally kidnapped them and brought them back? And the first case to reach the court was a private actor doing so. This was the Pinkertons days.
And those guys are great.
Yeah, exactly. They went down and grabbed a guy, I believe, from Argentina, brought him back. And the Supreme Court, was a controversial decision, but they decided that they said the rule about extradition governing personal jurisdiction only applies in actual cases of extradition. if you actually violate the extradition treaty or ignore the extradition treaty by rendition or kidnapping or capture, however you want to phrase it, but it doesn't come through the person's custody, did never come through the extradition process, they said that doesn't affect the personal jurisdiction of U.S. courts. The next time that rose but that was in a private actor context. So then the question became, well, what if, because part of their excuse was the private actor is not even a treaty participant to the extradition treaty, so they somehow interpreted that it doesn't violate the extradition treaty because they're not a state actor. Then in the mid-1980s, you remember Kiki Rodriguez, the DEA agent, went down to Mexico. What he didn't realize who he outed. He outed the Mexican military and the CIA, but that only came out later. They catch him, they torture him and murder him. They suspect that a doctor is connected to that extradition and murder. I think Nick will be right back. And so but the Mexican government doesn't agree with them. Mexican government says, we don't believe your evidence. We're not going to extradite this doctor. So the DEA agents go across the border and kidnap the doctor and bring him to the United States. Alvarez Machine was the case. That goes up to the U.S. Supreme Court. Now they have to decide, is there personal jurisdiction when a state actor has circumvented the extradition treaty to kidnap a person into U.S. jurisdiction for criminal prosecution? The Supreme Court, very split decision, deeply divided decision, but a majority of the court decides that the Pinkertons case of the late 19th century now governs even state actors in the 20th century. It says as long as and they decide to make a strict rule that the personal jurisdiction limitation of extradited defendants only applies in circumstances and cases where the person was extradited. That it doesn't matter who participated in his presence here, doesn't matter how illegal or unlawful his obtaining personal jurisdiction of the courts may have been. It does not matter if it involves government complicity or not, government agents or private participants, that there is no limitation on the personal jurisdiction of U.S. courts unless the person was literally extradited to the United States. And from that decision, now, when Noriega gets arrested a few years later or seized in Panama and brought to the United States, they say that applies even to a head of state. Because the question there was, what about the sovereign immunity of the head of state that is generally recognized both in U.S. law and around the world? And they said that even if it's a head of state, that they interpreted that narrowly to say the only limit ever on the personal jurisdiction of the United States courts in a criminal case is whether the person was extradited. That's it. So my argument was that was a wrong decision. The reason why I believed it was the wrong decision is twofold. One, the point and purpose of an extradition treaty is to create a process to discourage and dissuade cross-border invasions of other sovereign territory and kidnapping their citizens for the purposes of another state's civil or criminal case. That to me, that we want that the extradition treaties are meaningless if in fact you can just ignore it and kidnap the person instead. And that I felt if we were going to truly respect extradition treaties, that meant enforcing the personal jurisdiction limitation, so that the only limitation a federal U.S. court or any other court anywhere else could have is if they obtained it from a person who was seized overseas in another country, is if he was seized pursuant to the extradition laws and treaty of that country. And part of the policy reason behind it was to discourage and dissuade this kind of sort of self-help remedy that we generally discourage throughout the law, which is, we don't let landlords go and physically grab people and throw them out of their homes. They have to go through an eviction process. Why? Because the self-help remedies tend to create more conflict, tend to create more problems, tend to create more issues than they solve or remedy. And I felt the same was true in this context. Let me see if Nick is coming back. I think we're still live. That'd be an interesting question. Let's see. Yeah, I know. I can look up. Let's see if it's still live. So I'll answer some of the live chat until Nick can get back into the chat, into the stream. So from Russell, odds that this case goes to the Supreme Court. That's going to be very interesting. So the Noriega case never did go to the Supreme Court. And it was really politically fixed and rigged, thanks to Angel the Aussie for gifting the memberships to Ricardo as well. And so the question becomes, will the Supreme Court take this case? The district court's a sovereign district. I call it sovereign district, Southern District of New York, a very deep state-oriented court historically, very partisan court. Now, one unusual dynamic is everybody thought Noriega was guilty in the U.S. at the time of his being brought to the U.S. in the time of his trial. By contrast, they've done a survey on Nicolas Maduro, and majority of Americans do not believe currently that he's guilty. About 40% think he's guilty, about 20% think he's not guilty, and the rest, they don't know if he's guilty or not. But amongst Democrats who will dominate the Southern District of New York jury pool, they generally are split on even whether he's guilty or not. The mayor of New York City has already been saying it was an illegal bringing him in. Since it's Trump associated with bringing him in, you may have an anti-Trump jury pool that may acquit him. So this part of the case, typically the issue only gets to the Supreme Court if there's a conviction. In the criminal judicial process, it's very rare that you have what's called interlocutory appeals, and an appeal prior to trial. That's now they may take that up in this unique constitutional and legal context, but unlikely. So if he gets acquitted, well, the Supreme Court likely never hears the case. Let's assume he gets convicted. One of the issues will be whether he has immunity as head of state. And then the second will be whether or not the extradition treaty is required. Nick is back.
Hello.
Yeah, I was just answering the question about odds the case goes to the Supreme Court. Did the whole extradition breakdown. And my view is I think he would have to get convicted, I think, because the Supreme Court's not likely to get involved in an interlocutory basis. A chance, but I just don't think a real big chance. There's a chance he gets acquitted because, according to the polling data, I think only 25 or 28% of Democrats even think he's guilty at the moment. And this is a chance to screw Trump in a very liberal Democratic jury pool. The mayor of New York's already condemning it. So you can't roll. That would be how humiliating would that be for Trump if Maduro gets acquitted? But putting that aside, I think there's, it's an above average Supreme Court case because it's so high profile, so global, et cetera. On the extradition treaty, that was a real split issue all the way back then. My guess, if it did reach the Supreme Court, the three liberals will vote against Trump just to vote against Trump, no matter what it is.
They're good at that. They're like putting up a united front. There's really no meaningful analysis happening from the liberal side of the aisle. They're just like trying to unite in their liberalism, which is like, thanks guys. That doesn't help anybody.
Precisely. And so then the question is, does someone like Gorsuch has a libertarian lean, has a constitutionalist lean, an originalist lean. Does he become the fourth judge to accept cert, for example? And then it would be with Roberts, Barrett, Kavanaugh, Alito, Thomas. Would any of them join? I think chances of that are something like 1 in 10 that the Supreme Court were to step in and change that policy. But I don't think it's
isn't this ripe for? I mean, well, ripe is the wrong word because ripeness is a term of art with Supreme Court. But isn't this ripe for political question? Like this is a separation of powers issue between, between the executive and the legislative, sort of. Like it's sort of an executive question or sort of a political question, but like the resolution of it doesn't change any sort of outcome, right? Let's say that it goes to Supreme Court and they find Trump couldn't do this, but it's not going to undo the conviction.
It could
necessarily.
If they reinterpret the extradition requirement to say the only authority you have of personal jurisdiction in a U.S. court is if the person was obtained from overseas, is if he was obtained pursuant to an extradition treaty. That was the Alvarez-Machine argument that I think got 4 votes out of the Supreme Court.
Sure.
So then it would be the indictment has to be dismissed because there's no personal jurisdiction. To the argument that the Supreme Court might hear it beforehand, that is Alvarez-Machine. They heard that argument before he went to trial. By the way, when he went to trial, he got acquitted. There's a little known footnote to that case. That would be a way to do it. The other way that he'll bring up, that Noriega brought up, but he's got Maduro's already got it's him and his wife facing charges. They already have Julian Assange's lawyer working for them. So
Right.
this is a guy intricately understands all of these issues very, very well. So the sovereign immunity question will be the other one. And this has been kind of like, to your earlier question, what about a foreign head of state suing someone in the U.S.? It's kind of like the inverse version of that. To
Right.
what degree can we hold? In the Noriega case, they said it was fine, but it didn't reach the Supreme Court. And it was only the 11th Circuit, not binding in the Second Circuit.
Well, the problem with that, and this is the closest I found in the Macron case. Closest analog, I think, was when we had a group of Americans sue Libya over the Lockerbie incident, right? And but see, the way that resolved, though, is it resolved in favor of the executive as the sole organ of foreign relations, which is where we run into an issue here. If this isn't a declaration of war, and that's the thing I keep getting hung up on. I keep seeing like Justin Amash, that guy's an idiot, but he keeps saying stuff like Congress has to approve every offensive military action. But one, we know that's not true because of all of US history. We have offensive military actions that don't need congressional approval. We don't need the War Powers Resolution. We don't need the Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine is an articulation of executive authority, not a derivation of executive authority, right? So if this resolves as the president having control over foreign relations, because this isn't a declaration of war, under those meanings, or under the meaning of declaration of war in the Constitution, then Trump wins. And we just go, maybe we don't like this and we need to amend the Constitution, which may be the case. That might be the case that we want to do that. But right now, I look at this and I look at the Supreme Court that says you cannot add or take away any words from the Constitution. And they gave Congress the power to declare war. And for whatever this is, it's not a declaration. I mean, this looks like a commander-in-chief action. It involves the military. It is an offensive military action. I get it. But offensive military actions aren't always declarations of war. Like a declaration is a specific thing that exists and existed at the time of drafting.
And the tricky part of that is that the declaration of war constitutional authority side can really only be adjudicated in the impeachment context. Congress is only real enforcement authority. Now, they could cut off the budget and things like that, of course. But otherwise, all they can really do is impeach.
Let's watch Congress cut off the military's paychecks.
Yeah, unlikely.
They're never going to do it.
Now, I think Democrats probably will impeach Trump if they win back the House. They'll do it anyway, no matter what the circumstances, and they'll probably use some combination of Epstein, Venezuela, and the boats to do it because they'll think those are political winners for their base and whatnot. But independent of that, the sovereign immunity head of state argument, basically what I've encouraged people to think about is think about it just in the Trump context, and the same applies to foreign heads of state. And so the question is, if you did what you did as a foreign head of state, do you have immunity for it under U.S. law, which generally says foreign heads of state, there's very limited jurisdiction over them. And in Noriega, they skipped it, but there's a lot of, or they answered against Noriega, but there were some facts present in Noriega's case that aren't present here, and it's a different court. So I'll be interested to watch that. It's always been a sort of going issue as to how much does any nation, including the U.S., have to respect the sovereign immunity of a foreign state. As a whole, on the civil side, anybody's been through this, our federal courts are eager to let everybody off the hook. You have to pass special laws to hold, like Libya, to hold Saudi Arabia, to hold these other people accountable. You usually have to have a special law for it. But
isn't that because implicating a foreign state, and particularly implicating a foreign head of state by the judiciary, which in a civil action is entirely a judicial branch exercise unless the action is brought by Congress or the action is brought by the executive branch. But in a civil action brought by a private citizen, we now have the judicial branch exercising authority over something that has a direct line to foreign relations, of which the president is the sole Oregon. So I think that's a big problem with civil actions, and why the state or why courts are so reluctant um, to engage a private citizen suing a foreign head of state, or even a state suing a foreign state or a foreign head of state.
Yeah,
You have to get permission from the executive.
they've made it very difficult in those contexts to do so.
Yeah, but
But
in
the
the
only case that's ever adjudicated in the U.S. Has been the Noriega case. So I'll be curious to see how they develop those issues, how they resolve those, how they distinguish, if they do distinguish, because of the reason why the global court of public opinion and perception will matter is because it's going to impact the courts. So the Noriega was seen as a rah win. If this is seen as more controversial, then it inevitably, like people always argue, well, Barnes' court of public opinion is not going to matter to the courts. It always matters to the courts.
Just listen to Roberts mewling all the time. Like, it matters so much. Obamacare was not Roberts making a principled stand in favor of this law. He bent over backwards because he believed it was the right side of history. And he's since been roundly slapped down on that. But no, I think the biggest context here is that we have the executive through the federal court, or through the federal prosecutors. The executive itself is issuing this state conflict, or this conflict with another head of state, that's going through the president as sole organ. And so I think
the other interesting aspect here is they've chosen to use U.S. federal courts to do it. What's interesting is, like, a lot of these kind of, like, your Gitmo cases, your renditions, they never went. They always went to military tribunals outside the control of the federal judicial branch. And that
was before Hamdi, right? Hamdi v. Rumsfeld, which entitles basically anyone who's not a U.S. citizen has access to at least a habeas petition through U.S. district courts. Correct. So following Hamdi versus Rumsfeld, they basically, I think they're acknowledging that we have to go through a federal court action here. We can't use a military tribunal or put him in a military brig. He has the right to be in civil. Now, he can elect to be in a military brig, and I would, if I were Maduro, I would elect a military brig over, Gen Pop of the New York City jail. Like, I think, and that's probably a safer place for him in general.
I think they would be better off, frankly, having him in a hotel or something else so that nothing goes AWOL. But
with Secret Service,
if he dies in custody, that's not going to be good.
That would be tragic,
especially from a PR perspective. And at least he's not in the Epstein prison; he's in the one in Brooklyn. But I don't think it
would be tragic that Maduro dies. I don't care about that guy. It would be really bad for the political.
The political fallout would look very poor.
Right.
So I think we have very unique issues present that have rarely been adjudicated in American courts. That will be interesting. We'll see how things play out in terms of what Congress does or doesn't do in terms of that constitutional authorization side of the equation. I think some of this also will be impacted by, as you talked about, the policy fallout. In other words, does it work well? Does it look like it worked well? That's going to impact what Congress does. That's going to impact what the courts do. Does it go sour? Does it go sideways? Then all of a sudden, Trump is and the prosecution is in a more vulnerable position. Most likely, they do not dismiss the charges at any stage against Maduro. There is a risk, but it's not a super high risk from the Trump administration perspective. There's a risk on Congress, but that's more a deal with whether Democrats win the House or not.
Right.
And I think the persuasiveness of such an impeachment will heavily also depend on what happens in Venezuela, does he also use this to go into Colombia, go into Mexico, go into Cuba? If it becomes a big pattern, then politically you'll probably be in a more tenuous position. Now, before I was going to depart, I was going to answer some of the questions.
I have one for you from me, and then there's a couple super chats, and also whatever you've seen that's caught your eye. The one I want to get out from me real quick is, why Southern District, New York? Any thoughts? Is it a Trump prosecutor that they've installed in there? Like, what's going on there?
It's because I was trying to tell my friend Alex Jones that was a massive red flag about who was running the Venezuela operation, that this was a CIA operation, not an anti-deep state operation. Because logically, if you want to convict Maduro, you bring the case in the Southern District of Florida.
Exactly.
There's far more evidentiary ties to the Southern District of Florida. You have Cubans who are happy to hang him, Venezuelans that are happy to hang him. I had a prosecutor, there's a prosecutor actually in the Snipes case, when I was like, man, you're picking the most racially, the per capita capital of racial hatred to try Wesley Snipes in a case he's never been in, an area he's never lived in, an area he's never even visited. And he was like, well, let me just tell you a story, Robert. And this was Bobby O'Neill. He was old school, grew up in New York, Irish. I used to raise money for the IRA, by the way, on the side. I found that out during the investigation. I just showed up at one of his little fundraisers at the bar just to let him know I knew. He was like, oh, what are you doing here? It's Ireland. It's Ireland. I'm with you, Bobby. But he said, hey, what I always love about Miami Barnes is all I had to do was point to the flag, point to the defendant, and say convict. So logically, that's where this case should have been brought. When we saw it brought in the Southern District of New York, it was like, that means Trump's people aren't really running this case. It's a Trump prosecutor officially on the case, but the reason why he went easily through Senate approval for such a powerful district is because he's a lifelong deep state tied prosecutor. The judge assigned the case, longtime deep state aligned judge, and a range of controversial cases he's handled. So that was my concern, was if it's a deep state controlled case, that they got a bad jury pool. And what if the PR goes sideways on this? This could end up they could embarrass and set up Trump again, because they get what they want by by showing their power. They can remove and kidnap anybody from any foreign, et cetera. So the CIA gets to brag that way. And down deep, most of your career CIA people hate Trump because Trump's trying to restrain some of their, like trying to kill Vladimir Putin. It was the CIA who tried to do that, by the way. They pretended it was Ukraine. It was the CIA. They just, got kind of caught. They even tried to pretend, no, we weren't trying to hit the house. It was some other building in the vicinity. And unfortunately, one of the drones landed and they took out the mapping software from the drone and it was right to Putin's house. So, but that's how crazy some of these CIA guys are. They're like 1960s level crazy. They're going to unleash Operation Gladio style terror through the Ukrainian regime long after that war is over to haunt us forever. But putting that aside for the moment, that's where my concern is. It was a deep red flag that this case was being. They prosecuted Noriega down in Florida. They weren't dumb enough. Also, the 11th Circuit, much more. 11th Circuit doesn't care about any international crap.
New York definitely does.
Yeah, Second Circuit is one of the most proactive enforcing international legal standards. And so I think it was a trap, is my view.
SC New York, that all makes sense. It aligns with the Epstein stuff too, because Epstein had an immunity agreement from the United States attorneys, and Southern District of New York's like, yeah, fuck that. We don't care. And they prosecuted him, they were going to prosecute him anyway until he gracefully exited this world or whatever, completely on his own. But like Southern District of New York was where they knew they could overcome something so trivial as an immunity agreement from a U.S. attorney and prosecute him for the exact stuff that was in that agreement. So that makes sense. And that's what I was thinking too, is whoever's pulling the strings on this believes that they can utilize this court for their purposes. The hard part is knowing what that is.
Correct. And it's just a bad sign the district they chose. It means you can't trust what they're up to. And that's my concern on that side of the aisle.
Okay, so did you see some questions that you wanted to address specifically?
Yeah, well, there were some common themes. So like the answer to the Supreme Court one, the Glenn Beck was proposing the theory that the Alex Jones theory, I'll answer quickly. Maduro will produce no evidence of any impact whatsoever on the 2020 election. That is all false intel. It's a twofer. They get to leak false information through someone who might have been a reliable source in the past to Jones. Jones, by running with his story, leads people that might otherwise be skeptical about what's going on to be distracted and think, oh, it's all okay. And then if it blows up and Jones ends up being proven wrong, then they get to embarrass and discredit someone who's a big critic of them. So it's a two-for winner. You'll find there's no connection like that. Like there's this talk that, oh, Maduro's going to squeal on all the big Democrats and rat out the deep state. Zero chance of that, folks. Now on the flip side, Glenn Beck's theory was this is to cut off China. China only gets about 4% of its oil from Venezuela anyway, and they got Russia real close by. China wasn't involved in Venezuela in order to get oil. They were involved with Venezuela to try to screw the U.S. by being present on our continent. That's what that was. Hey, if they China tried, it failed. They'll be like, okay, whatever. It will have no meaningful impact. Beck is out there saying this will be the end of China. China will collapse. No, none of that's going to happen. In fact, what it did is it helped Russia, because now Russia's like, yeah, China, you need our oil even more than ever, especially this heavy crude and the kind of medium to heavy crude that we produce that other countries don't. So that was the answer to that one. Let's see. Oh, someone asked, well, isn't it the case that there were 0 civilian casualties? Unfortunately, that turned out to be untrue. So it went from 0 to 40 to 80 to 100. In Panama, we said only 250 civilians died. Then they kept finding the mass graves where we had dumped a bunch of the bodies. It ended up being around 4,000, 5,000.
It's a couple big holes amongst friends.
Yeah, exactly. They burned down like 20,000 poor people's homes, all this other stuff. Sadly, our military believes in this, post-Vietnam believes in this mass. Well, really, it started World War II. They believe the number one goal is to avoid military casualties. So consequently, they go in. So it's not like Russia. Russia does like truly pinpoint strikes. Their civilian casualty ratio is ridiculously low in that war from Russian attacks. The U.S. unfortunately has a different approach. We firebombed Dresden, we firebombed Tokyo, we dropped a couple of nukes. So our position is
firebombing campaigns had a higher immediate death toll than the nuclear campaign.
By far, especially in Tokyo. So by the way, that was why all the military generals didn't like Nuremberg. They're like, we're setting a precarious precedent here. Let's not have anybody mad at us for what we did in a war if we happen to lose sometime.
Siege. Movie The Siege with Bruce Willis and Denzel Washington. I mean, Bruce Willis, there's a whole bunch of political stuff wrong with it or whatever, but it really does illustrate, like, Bruce Willis, like, please don't deploy me into New York City because the military, you don't want them in the U.S. because we act differently. When things need to get done, we get them done. And we don't mess around with like that whole civil liberties thing. And that's how it plays out. That's how war works. Like right. War is tyranny and it's executed forcefully. Yes. But
I hope we stay out, and in terms of minimizing civilian casualties and the rest going forward. But there'll probably be several hundred civilian casualties. That it may end up being 1,000. We'll see. It depends on how this plays out over time. But my guess is there were too many bombs that went off for the civilian casualties to be what they initially reported.
Yeah, I didn't think there wouldn't be civilian casualties. I hadn't heard the 0 civilian number. I had only heard the 0 American casualties, which that was pretty. That's an impressive thing to pull off. I'm glad our soldiers came back and FBI agents came back safe. I guess.
Somebody asked about. Yeah, I think the military did their job very well.
That's one thing about this. It was done exquisitely. It was executed about as well as you could expect it to go.
Which means it was a little bit of theater and it was an inside job, usually more often than not. I think somebody decided, Nikki, you got to go. Sorry, buddy.
It's happening.
And that's why he had his private Cuban guard. Unfortunately, they were all executed. Just boom. Someone asked who decided to blow up the Hugo Chavez Memorial. Turned out that they missed, or there were bombs around it. They showed photos today. The Chavez Memorial is still standing there in Caracas.
That was fun.
Somebody.
It was too funny to be true, I guess.
Oh, that's right. Someone's mentioned. I am going to be up in Minnesota. I keep forgetting this.
Yeah, I was just about to read this one. Go for Big Guy 911 says, "Hey Nick, join us March 21st, 2026 at Kragen's Resort in Brainerd, Minnesota, as Robert, Richard Barris, and Steve Bannon help turn Minnesota America First, Populous Red in 26 and 28.
Yeah, we're gonna be up there to do a speaking at I think in the Twin Cities in March. So yeah, we'll have to catch up. That'll be fun.
Yeah, I'll come find you guys. Absolutely.
Oh yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
you
it'll be
can't
good.
hide from me.
Yeah, yeah,
I'll
exactly.
track you down. Gopher Big Guy says, question for Robert. Do you consider us to be in the middle of World War III? And is it too late to avoid it?
No, but
Here's
if
an
the CIA had succeeded at murdering Putin, we would have been. Because what they don't understand is Putin is contrary to the caricature we get of him in the West. In my view, is a rapprochement with Russia makes sense. Our national security strategy memorandum, written by Eldridge Colby, Undersecretary of Defense, agrees that it makes sense for Russia is a conservative country, a Christian country, a big land country, produces its own food, its own fuel, and its own defense through nuclear weapons. That we're a conservative Christian, fundamentally, country that can fuel ourselves, feed ourselves, and defend ourselves. We should be aligned to break the back of the globalists, not let the globalists divide us into constant conflict. But I think if the CIA had succeeded at killing Putin, everybody else behind Putin has a much more negative view. I think one risk Trump is running geopolitically in terms of things like this, the perception after the Hamas thing, the Qatar thing, and then this attack on Putin also happened while he was talking to Zelensky. And is the perception that's out there, and you'll hear this from global opinion commentators, is that Trump's a trickster. That Trump say, hey, come do a negotiation. Hey, we kidnapped you. Hey, come do a negotiation. Hey, surprise bombing. The problem is that's going to lead to distrust around the world globally. And it's very hard to get anything done if people think you're untrustworthy or trying to set them up. So, but I think that we would have been on the verge. We're not now in World War III. But if we let the CIA do the crazy things they're trying to do in Russia, then that is what could bring us into. There are people in Russia seriously saying this, including an American colonel that's now that was a Russian and moved back to Russia, saying on Russian TV that, look, America only respects power, and like things like this kind of reinforce that perception. And look at America. America established its dominance by dropping nuclear bombs. Maybe it's time we, Russia, use our nuclear bombs. I don't like it when we start hearing that kind of conversation. So that's our greatest tripwire for World War III.
I don't want to keep you too long, but conversely, would you say that this is one of the things that I thought immediately was, okay, after the botched Putin assassination, does this give Putin pause to go, hey, wait a minute, like, is this leverage in peace talks with Ukraine? Like, we can go in and grab you where you are. And
right.
Do you think that that's a possible influence from the Trump administration or an intention?
What's fascinating thing with Putin is he believes in the law. Like, they call him an autist when it comes to the law in Russia. So he's the most restrained. He's always like, well, what precedent does this set? Is it a good precedent? All he cares about all those things. If he's ever out of power, the rest of Russia will be absolutely aligned that way. No, he say, let's remind you who you are. They even put this on Russian TV after the UK started talking big. They said, well, let's look at our new tsunami-inducing nuclear-powered mini drone submarine. Let's look at what would happen to the United Kingdom if we launched it there. And they showed the tsunami swamping over all of the United Kingdom. So, yes, there are people in Russia who would like to be Trumpish in their own right and will use this precedent accordingly.
Gabbers02 says, my two favorite lawyers. Hey, thanks. I'm suspended, though, so I'm not real. And BBB says, I bet there was a data extraction operation at the same time as the Maduro extraction. Maduro might as well have been the distraction. I always figured they got Noriega because he played the CIA dirty in drug deals. Anything to
what happened? Mostly Noriega was a disguise. The theory was Poppy Bush wanted to retake the canal, and they had Carter had given it up. Reagan wanted to he strongly protested that. You can see the old debates with him and Pat Buchanan debating William F. Buckley and others about the Panama Canal Treaty. People may not remember Buckley was on the side of the treaty, by the way. But they wanted to take it back. And they thought the best way to take it back is to take out the Panama military and say, we need to have a presence now to secure it. And they're like, well, how do we take out the Panama military? Well, Noriega's a bum. He's been our drug dealer, but a huge drug dealer there in Panama. Why don't we just attack him? People forget all the little stories that built up to that. They kept sending U.S. soldiers into the streets, trying to provoke a reaction. They claimed one guy had been detained, that his wife had been threatened with sexual assault, all that. They built up this huge drama. American citizens are at risk. That kind of narrative. So all of that was in play. The goal, Noriega was a sideshow. The goal was to try to take back the canal. It just didn't ultimately work, though Trump occasionally thinks about doing it himself, because the oligarchs we put in power were, one, the drugs went crazy, but mostly they were so terrible at managing Panama that it led to them being thrown out of power, and they were never able to get a renegotiation of the Canal Treaty meaningfully through. My favorite part, though, of that whole story is like 2 years after we take out the Panama Army and basically kill them all, the Congress passes a law saying we need to reconsider the Panama Canal Treaty because we're deeply disturbed by the lack of an army in Panama.
Well, sir, I've kept you past time. I always have a wonderful conversation with you. Thank you for bringing your insight. I always love discussing these things, and especially like discussions on Twitter, because people, when you're a lawyer or whatever, when you're talking from a legal perspective, people conflate what you believe the legal reality to be with what you think should be. And it's what is versus what ought. And so I always like to explore this, and you've been very forthright and forthcoming in sharing your opinions on this stuff and why. And I always value that wisdom. So I'm really appreciate you coming on tonight. And I know there's some questions that are still out there in the chat. I'm happy to answer those. But I wanted to give you kind of a minute for any closing remarks if you needed to head out.
Oh yeah, no problem. It's always great to be here. It's great to get to, have these deeper dives into the broader discussions, the law, the policy, the politics, throw in some history, give some case precedent, legal realism. There's what the law is as the Mexico likes to say, Mexicans like to say, Constitution made of paper, blade made of steel. So, I get all that while trying to discourage people actually embracing might makes right, moral relativism, all power comes out of a barrel of a gun. So I keep trying to remind my friends on the right, that's what the commie left believes. Do we want to be moral relativists? I don't think so. That doesn't mean we don't have to recognize the realism of what will or won't happen in terms of consequence. But we shouldn't let that, deform our understanding of the law and the principles of the law. If I sin and I'm not caught, it didn't suddenly not become a sin. So the
says you.
Yeah, exactly. So that's my broad perspective out there. But great community, great chat, great conversation. Glad to see you up and going. Glad to see the channel get up and going. So to have fun, informative, interesting conversations and topics and get into this and help the midnight hour community that I know that has always liked the opportunity to listen to you. It gives them time when they're on their 3rd hour shift or when they're a truck driver that's on the road, all those folks. And I would say, some people were getting doom pilled that were on the advert that didn't like what this was. As long as all of these people are human beings making decisions, and as long as you do whatever you can, focus on your own family first and your friends and your community and your neighborhood first. But as long as good people exist, evil will never fully win. So always keep that in mind. They don't try to censor you because your opinion doesn't matter. They don't try to propagandize you because your actions have no consequence. You always have power. Remember how to use it. Use it constructively. Use it positively, and never get defeated by something you might see as a poor decision or a dangerous decision. Stay active, stay involved, stay engaged, stay informed. What's great about Dick's channel is it helps people get self-informed and self-educated as a way to understand the law and the world around us. So always a privilege, always a pleasure, and have a good night.
Yeah, brother. Thank you so much for hanging out, and I'll see you soon, man.
Will do.
All right. Peace. Guys, I want to add something. We're not done. You don't get to leave yet. Barnes can go. Barnes has earned his right to go. You all stay. One of the things I want to add to that is one of the reasons this is hard is because there aren't analogous cases to this. This is something that doesn't happen very often. And that is an opportunity not to embrace what Barnes is saying, not to get doom pilled, not to oh my gosh, everything's so bad. Can't believe the US did this. These cases are hard because they they come up so rarely, and they're an opportunity for us to go, wait, can we do this? Can we do this? Like, do we have the authority to do this? And then, do we want to keep doing this in the future? That's what these are about. And that's what these discussions are about. And that's what your votes are about. That's what shaping American policy through your own voice, no matter how big or small it may be. That's what this is all about. What do we do going forward? I think a likely outcome, no matter what happens here, they can find that Trump exceeded his authority, but unless the House is going to impeach him, okay, Trump exceeded his authority. Don't do it again until next time, right? We don't have a lot of these things, and they're not analogous. This is not Noriega in Panama. This is Maduro in Venezuela in 2026. These are different cases. We have this pseudo war going against narcotics trafficking and the narcotics trade in coming out of Venezuela. Does that justify our actions? Can we run a war on narco terrorism? Do we get to say whatever we want plus terrorism equals justification for war and military action? Maybe we do. Maybe we don't. Do we want that? These are the questions we have to ask. This is what is supposed to come out of these discussions. And so I want people to carry that out of this, if nothing else, because that's the important thing. I mean, one thing I meant to get out while Barnes is on stream is, despite the might makes right claim, one of the most frequently asked questions that I saw about this was, can we do this? Can Trump do this? Yes. Yes. And it's the nature of power that people misunderstand. Power means you can do something. Someone can tell you not to, or say that what you did was wrong, but the power exists, the ability exists, the authority exists to do this. And this is where I think most people's folly with the Constitution comes from. Article 2, Section 1, Line 1, the executive authority is instilled in a president of the United States. Barnes went through a very nice description of the declaration of war going to Congress and why we partitioned out amongst our elected officials the ability to declare war. What was the purpose in that? To prevent empire building of one man. But we have to stop and say, why did we need to do that in the first place? And it's because empire building authority rested in one man. What did we give to Congress? We gave to Congress a check on the ability to engage in empire from one person, a king, a monarch, a head of state, a president. We didn't take the rest of it away. And that's where I think this lies. I take minor umbrage with one thing Barnes says, and this is in total respect to him, because I really, really do treasure him and his insight. But I think everybody gets hung up on this idea that we don't have a king, that there's an expansion of Article 2 authority. No. Article 2 authority is the breadth of the head of state in 1791. It is all power. That is then pared down by what is delegated to Congress, what is delegated to the judicial branch, what is reminded of the government in the Bill of Rights and subsequent amendments. But executive authority is exceedingly broad. It was understood to be exceedingly broad. They took away the parts that they thought were important. And if we get stuck in this idea that anytime the president does something that we didn't maybe know if they could do or not, then we get stuck in this idea that Congress's authority is exceedingly broad. And we know that's not true, because Article 1, Line 1 is the legislative authority as herein defined is given to a Congress made up of a House and a Senate. The legislative authority is not a pre-existing authority that's recognized at the drafting of the Constitution. The legislative branch is said to be the most powerful branch of government. It's given preeminence in the Constitution. It's the first one. It's the longest article. They laid it out on the table and were measured the longest. But that is because it needed to be most clearly defined, because it did not exist, because the assumption of that authority was not something that was present, not universally present, but the understanding of executive authority was ubiquitous at the time. Everyone knew what a monarch could do, and a monarch could do a lot. We forget that so often. I don't say this to have any personal opinion on whether or not Trump should have nabbed Maduro. There's a lot of factors in that. I don't really give a shit. Maduro sucks. I don't care that he was grabbed. I don't care if he dies in prison. I don't like, other than the fallout to the United States and stuff like that. But in general, like, he's a bad dude. He's been bad for Venezuela. He's bad for the United States. He's a bad guy. Okay. I'm not broken up about it. I don't necessarily endorse what we've done. I want our actions to have legitimacy. But whose legitimacy am I concerned about? Where is legitimacy bestowed upon the actions of our government? It's from us. I don't give a shit about the international community except for how it impacts us. But there isn't some overarching sovereign federation, like in some gay Star Trek fantasy or something, where we answer to some governing board. The United States answers to itself, and then it answers to power after that. And Barnes strays away from might makes right, because might makes right is dangerous. Might makes right is dangerous when you're not the mighty, right? Like, if you're the biggest motherfucker on the block, might makes right is what you want. Now, I'm trying to be cautionary here, because I don't, that's not my ideal, but that is our reality. And we are not dealing with honest brokers around the world. We're not. So you agree with Lindsey Graham? Don't you dare. Don't you dare ever say that again. My little ladybugs. No, it's the global reality is there is no one who polices the United States. We do not submit to the International Criminal Court. We don't. We don't cooperate to them. We don't cooperate with them or submit to them. We don't do that. We literally, our government they answer to us, and they answer to the threat of global conflict. That's it. Short of that, what is the check on America? Do we want one? We're the ones who check ourselves. No one else can do it right. The thing that constrains might makes right is the Constitution, though. It is our Constitution and our adherence to it, which is why I always look internally when we're talking about these things. Does Trump have the authority to do this? I think yes. Do I want Trump to have the authority to do this? I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure I want that, but he has it. It's in Article 2. He's the commander-in-chief of the military. He's the chief executive officer who's in charge of prosecuting federal law through his Department of Justice, which, of course, utilizes the courts, but the Department of Justice is executive branch. And finally, he's a sole organ of foreign relation. Like it or not, Obama was too. And when it comes down to what will impact us internationally in our international relations with other nations, it's the president. It's the one thing that's probably paramount that the president is supposed to do, is to deal with foreign nations and then facilitate the common defense that our government is tasked with providing. And all of that is checked by us, not somebody else. All of that is checked by the Constitution, not somebody else. If we determine the president has too much authority, we need to curtail it. If we determine the president has grossly exceeded his authority, we need to impeach him. I don't think he has here, though. Again, we may not like what we did in Venezuela, or you may. I'm indifferent. People can like it or not like it. If you don't like it, you have to determine whether or not he exceeded what he's supposed to do. I don't think he did, but you can make that determination. If so, impeach him. If you don't like it and you can't impeach him, then what you need to do is change the rules, change the constraints, put more handcuffs on. We have an amendment process, but we know that Congress is a group of feckless, Ponzi cowards. They're not going to do it. They're not going to amend the Constitution. They're afraid of all this stuff. But everybody keeps talking. And this has been just my favorite part of Trump. I don't even agree with him on so much of this stuff. I don't agree with him. But it's my favorite part of Trump is this. Everybody says presidents can't do that. And then he does. And then when they look at it and the courts look at it, they go, yeah, you probably can. Probably can do that. Yeah, he can do that. And we go, yeah, because he's king. If you don't want a king, you got to fix it. Anyway, those are just some thoughts that I had on this. I saw a couple questions, and I want to get into this. I got into it a little bit with Barnes, but there's maybe more to be said. Southern District of New York, why they picked that venue. Barnes shared his opinions. I think those are probably right. There's some string pulling and authority there as to why Southern District of New York is a choice, because it doesn't make sense otherwise, unless it's possible that they could tie Maduro specifically to New York. Maybe when he traveled to, I don't know if he went to like some UN meeting or something. I have no idea. Who knows? Maybe he was in New York at some point and they determined that he was in violation of law in New York, or that he made phone calls or whatever while he was here that facilitated international criminal actions. I don't care. Someone asked, can they move the venue? Can they change it from New York to Florida? No. They can't. They cannot change the venue, because venue is about convenience of the forum, not about jurisdiction. Jurisdiction is a separate issue to venue. They're often interwoven, but they can't change the venue because there's no justification to change the venue. Maduro will be held somewhere close enough to the venue to make it convenient for him. The prosecuting attorney is in the venue, and that's where probably the nexus of evidence is. And the people involved are the U.S. government. They have the ability to put witnesses in any federal court, so that there's not a convenience issue there. Maduro himself would not have a more convenient time in Florida than he would have in New York. There's just no way to justify, unless Maduro had some sort of like residence in the United States or some business interest or something, where the evidence would be localized in a different place than New York in the United States. Other than that, they're not going to get a venue change. So that's just not going to happen. There's no legal justification for it. I'm sure Maduro will say, gee, this is convenient. But like, it doesn't matter what he says. There isn't a legal convenience argument. It's not like, it's not personal preference or anything. It's all about, is there a legal convenience argument? And there just isn't in this case. The ability to prosecute him in any place exists, any federal court exists for the crimes that he's alleged to have committed. Now, there is an argument for the Southern District of New York that has nothing to do with the deep state. And that is that the Southern District of New York has dealt with high profile and international political indictees in the past, including, I brought up Hamdi versus Rumsfeld. That was a case in which it was determined that foreign agents in a foreign theater of war were entitled to American courts, not military courts. They were entitled to American civilian courts. There's another case that says that U.S. citizens are not entitled to the same thing. They get a military tribunal, but foreign agents get that treatment. Now, that was applied to the 9/11 hijackers, not the hijackers, they kind of died. The organizers of 9/11 who were apprehended were off and brought to Guantanamo, which is a military installation. They won the right to go to New York courts. They didn't exercise that choice. But there is a history of New York having these high profile, extremely politicized figures, both being held there and being set to utilize the courts. So I think that's a rational reason that could exist that doesn't involve like a deep state explanation. Although I personally think the deep state answer is at least as plausible, if not more so. They probably just work hand in hand, frankly. But that's that. But another person asked, could they try him under a military tribunal? No, he's especially if we're at war, he's definitely not, but he's a state actor. I mean, he is the head of state of Venezuela. He's not a non-uniformed combatant or anything like that. He would be entitled to civilian courts in the United States. That's the ruling. You don't have to like it or agree. That just is. We got a couple super tips here.
2 of my favorite Rumble personalities.
I don't know if I qualify as a Rumble personality anymore, but we are live on Rumble, of course. And, my Rumble people are loved very, very much. Principled Uncertainty says the elites are doing what they do and the crowd cheered on time. Read The Populist Delusion. Well, I don't want to. No, I'm just kidding. I appreciate the super tip there. Look, it's tough. I've been trying to explain to people that I believe that Trump has full legal authority to do what he's done. People assume that means that I'm like in the pocket of Trump or like in the tank for him or approve of it. I don't necessarily approve. I just don't see a lack of legal authority for him to do it. Congress whinging over and over and over again about how, oh my gosh, Trump needs the approval of Congress to do any offensive act. No, that's insane. That's insane. That's not what it says. And we need to get that notion out of our head. If Congress doesn't like the president's actions, military actions, offensive military or otherwise, then Congress needs to defund the military or defund the president's specific military actions or impeach him. That's what they need to do. That's their job. They don't want to do it. If they don't like it, fix it. They're the only ones who can do anything about it at all. We can't. There's no superseding authority to the president that can do it. The court can't do it on its own. The court can't even do it. That would be an undue exercise of power because Congress has a sole power to impeach. Remove the AUMF. The AUMF is not necessary for Venezuela. I don't think the Venezuelan action falls under the AUMF. Personally, the authorized use of military force in tracking down, apprehending, or executing the perpetrators of the 9/11 terrorist attacks, I don't think extends to Venezuela. So I don't think. I mean, we may want to end the AUMF anyway, but I don't think it matters. Also, the War Powers Resolution. Maybe I should do a brief talk about the Monroe Doctrine, the War Powers Resolution, because I think people seem to be getting these mixed up. I was thinking about doing a whole show going through the War Powers Act. And that's something I still might do. But before I do that, let me read this. Bako Sauce over on Rumble says, late and Cody, always. Enwin says, would this change if Venezuela signed off on an extradition now/soon? I don't think so, because they can't extradite him. Venezuela doesn't have him in their jurisdiction. So they can't extradite him. Venezuelan law prevents Venezuela from extraditing a Venezuelan national to the United States, period. Our extradition treaty with Venezuela does not include Venezuelan nationals. They will extradite other nationals, Colombian, Ecuadorian, United States, Mexico, Russian. I mean, I shouldn't say will, but under the treaty, they're supposed to extradite anyone who's not Venezuelan. Nicolas Maduro, as head of state, I think qualifies as a citizen of Venezuela, and therefore as a Venezuelan national, and they will not extradite him. That's the treaty that we have with Venezuela is not as strong as we have in some other countries. And this is, of course, one of the problems, right? There is no authority we could appeal to in Venezuela to get Nicolas Maduro brought to the United States, other than for us to go get him or to have someone else abduct him. But if we facilitate an illegal abduction, then that's a crime too. But there isn't an authority. There isn't an extradition process. I want to answer something Barnes asked during the show. He said he kept going towards, does the United States have to recognize the sovereign immunity of another nation or another nation's leaders? No. The answer is no. That's not a question, in my opinion. I mean, it is, of course, a question, but it's not actually a question of U.S. authority, insofar as that is solely a question for the executive branch and the president. Interstate relations are the president's purview, period. So the judicial branch cannot. This is, I think, a problem that we may have overlooked in this, is that the judicial branch cannot turn down this. And if this does go to the Supreme Court, I think they defer to political question, and that this is a sole purview of the president. The executive authority, through its U.S. Attorney's Office, has brought this action against Nicolas Maduro. That's it. Congress didn't do it, and the judicial branch didn't do it. They can't, because the president is the sole organ of foreign relations. He's the only one who can do something that is, he and his branch of government that's the only machine that can implicate foreign relations so much as to extract a foreign head of state. And that is where I get wrapped up again in this declare war thing. Because we're not at war with Venezuela. Is capturing a foreign head of state in the state, is that an act of war? It can be. Venezuela may regard it as an act of war. But Barnes is working backwards there. What would we think if this happened to us? I don't think that's proper, because our Constitution doesn't ask whether a foreign nation would determine an act by the United States to be an act of war. The Constitution asks whether we are engaging in the declaration of war. That's way different. That's way different. That's us. That's our intent. That's our motivation. Congress is involved in declaring war. The United States president is the sole organ of managing relations with foreign nations. If he wants to abduct a head of state, that's a presidential question, not a congressional one. And people may be very uncomfortable with that. Okay. That's fine. But time and time again, the Supreme Court has deferred to the president's authority as the sole organ of foreign relations ever since Curtis Wright shipping. I think it's United States versus Curtis Wright. Only the president gets to answer these questions. That's why we elect him. He is the manifest political will of the nation. He is the manifest representative of the United States to other heads of states. He is a person that we want to be the guy who talks to another king, another president, a prime minister, Stormy Daniels, whatever it may be, right? He's the person that we picked, for better or worse. He's the person who gets to determine if when the, let's say Macron, the French prime minister, shows up, right? Or president, whatever he is. He shows up. Trump wants to insult him, spit on him, laugh at him, fart on him, and do all these things. He can do that. He can embarrass this guy. He can make a fool of himself, whatever. We don't get to question that. Congress doesn't get to, Congress can impeach him. They can do that. But that's it. That's their sole power here. And that's what bothers me about all this. This isn't an act of war. We have not decided to have a war with Venezuela. Our goal in apprehending Maduro was not to engage in war with Venezuela. It's not a declaration of war. Not under any definition that I can reasonably assert. The only thing I've seen is people say, anything we do offensively that involves the military is a declaration of war. But that's not true. That's not true. We're not declaring war with every offensive military action in an ongoing campaign. That hasn't been true since World War II. We have not declared war, though we've taken all kinds of offensive military actions. And I don't care that Congress has approved them in some stretch of the word. Those still aren't declarations of war. And according to these people, like, again, Justin Amash, any offensive military action is a declaration of war. But Congress has decided not to do that. They've decided to authorize military force. Why won't they declare war? What's the purpose of them not declaring war? There must be a difference. It must exist, right? Logically speaking, if an offensive military action is a declaration of war, they would just declare war. But we know that their authorization for offensive military action is not a declaration of war because they wouldn't dare do that. And the fact that they're going to say, we get this broader power beyond declaring war to handcuff the president and say, we're authorizing your military actions. We're authorizing your offensive actions. The War Powers Resolution actually constrains the president in specifically defensive military actions, which it can't do. This is why I need to go through the War Powers Resolution. Maybe tomorrow. But it specifically constrains the president to defensive action. It can't do that. That's unconstitutional. Now, I know what people will say. Well, the War Powers Resolution has existed for blah, 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 1973 or whatever. Too fucking bad. All sorts of things exist under the law. It's still against the law for a white person to marry a black person in some states. But because of Loving versus Virginia in 1963, Supreme Court case says that law is unenforceable. War Powers Resolution, the War Powers Act, I believe is unenforceable as well. The fact that presidents abide by it is because they're acting nice. It's more of an agreement because Congress can defund the military. They can. If you read the War Powers Act, it says that any action by the president into hostile territory, Congress must be notified within 48 hours. And the president must provide a specific report on his actions as commander-in-chief of the military to Congress. Where's that in the Constitution? Where is that? They've extrapolated that from Congress's power to declare war. That doesn't seem like that's what it says to me. Maybe you guys read it differently. Or maybe you haven't read it. I mean, I hadn't. Who reads the War Powers Resolution unless you need to, right? Once it comes up, I read it and I was like, this thing's bullshit. This is such an overly broad power grab by Congress, handcuffing the president as commander-in-chief with authority that they don't have. So then we go back. What does the War Powers Resolution authorize the president to do? It gives him up to 60 days. What if the president ignores that? What does Congress do? You got to bring back the troops. No, I don't want to. I don't want to. They scare me. They're very terrifying. They're very good. Very good. The best in the world. But I hear they kidnap foreign leaders. I don't want to bring them back. I'm going home. No, Mr. President, we need you. You have to bring them back. This piece of paper says so. You have 60 days. Bring them back. I'm not going to. So then they extend it. Okay, well, you have another 60 days. I'm not bringing him back. What's their next option? It's back to basics. Impeach or defund the military. That's all they got. That's it. But that was always what they had. So putting these restrictions on the president, all it does is it says, if you don't do this, we'll impeach you or defund the military. But that already exists. So what is the purpose of the War Powers Resolution? The purpose of the War Powers Resolution was not to constrain the president, because they can't. The War Powers Resolution was to define the terms by which Congress would authorize actions of the president. Is to tell that's the only logical outcome. It can be. They may not have intended it that way, but that's the only logical outcome. Because Congress's only possible retaliation, enforcement, policing of the president would be to impeach him or to defund the military. That already existed. So the War Powers Resolution is meaningless in its purpose of constraining the president. And again, an unconstitutional requirement. The president does not have to justify his actions to Congress unless he wants to engage in a non-declaration of war military action. Even though they keep saying those don't exist, they have to. They have to exist. They're contemplated all over the place, and yet they scream and scream that they don't. Because they're scared that they don't have the power that they keep asserting. Why would an asshole sign up to you? Wait, what? Why would an asshole sign up to me? Because I like assholes. Anyway, I don't think the president has exceeded his authority here, but that's because I believe the president's authority is much more broad than we were taught in school. It is much more broad than presidents have acted. And whenever we finally get strongman presidents, Andrew Jackson, FDR, Reagan, Trump, whenever we get them, even though FDR's legs weren't strong, he was still a strongman president. They assert their authority. They get their dick out and everybody gets down on their knees and says, yes, sir. Every time. They don't lose. And it's not because we're expanding presidential authority through like some corrupt court. It's because courts are recognizing that that's what the Constitution actually says. I skipped Nixon. Well, he's not a crook. All right. Let me answer some questions, then we'll probably wrap up the show before too long here. Long last name. Welcome to membership. Thank you. And guys, make sure you check out vivabarneslaw.locals.com. You can find Robert Barnes all over there, along with my other friend, Viva Fry. They're a tag team of dreams and wonderful, Rumble show hosts and insightful, thoughtful people. But there are no answers. There are no answers in the legal world. There are only arguments, there are questions, and there's discussion about it. And they're excellent at it. You may not agree with all of their perspectives, and that's fine. They may not agree with their own perspectives after a while, too. I know I change my mind from time to time. So it's only reasonable that other people, I guess, are allowed to as well. But one thing they are is entertaining, educated, and, pretty reliably good chaps. Okay, Russell Hall says, odds this goes to the Supreme Court. I think the Supreme Court would refuse to hear it. I think the Supreme Court would refuse to hear it under the doctrine of political question. You say that is if Congress doesn't like what the president has done, Congress has the tools to remove him. Dirt Cheap says, what happens if he's found not guilty? Egg on the face of the United States, of course, but also if he's found not guilty, we get to make a big to-do about the exercise of justice in the United States. And that, while we may go through lengths to apprehend people, they were given their fair shake in court. I have a feeling that this will not see a trial of Nicolas Maduro. I think we'll see a plea or something else. That is where I think this goes. I do not think we see this go to trial. Under no circumstances do I think that happens. Adrian Robledo says, in a just world, they would let all the Venezuelans buy a ticket to apply to Maduro the same things he did to the people in the helicide, whatever it is. This is a problem with Maduro that Barnes and I didn't get into too much. I think he's credibly accusable of severe atrocity. And one, he's a communist, and communists always kill. They just do. But two, there's documented atrocity at the hands of Maduro and his government. So, I mean, I think we have some cases here for the prosecution of a genocidal monster. Stephen, watch it, crowd up. We'll get there. Principled uncertainty says it was never about drugs, communism, or the price of tea. It opened the door for further action against the enemies of our desert friends. MAGA has gone full retard, sadly. And again, you do not have to like this. I'm not the biggest fan. Again, I'm not broken up about it. But one of the things I like about Barnes, he goes, okay, what if we did this to other people? What if we did this here and here and here? And that is a risk. That is a question. The president has the power to do this. I don't know that the president has the power to do that. This and that being just stand-in terms, right? These are not the same thing. And that's really important. Someone online very politely asked, well, what about when we went after Osama bin Laden? What was the difference there? We went into Pakistan. We didn't tell Pakistan that we were going after Osama bin Laden, et cetera. What's the difference? Well, we did have the authorized use of military force, which gave full authority to the United States government to track down and murder the perpetrators of the 9/11 terror attacks. Osama bin Laden being the chief organizer of that, allegedly. He was premier on the list. And we actually had quite a bit of cooperation with Pakistan. We just didn't tell them when we were going in specifically, which was the right thing to do. But that being said, the president, Obama, right, at the time, has to make the decision. Does us going into Pakistan to kill Osama bin Laden, does that damage our international relations, our relationship with Pakistan, maybe with India, maybe with Afghanistan, whatever? Does that do sufficient damage to outweigh what we're doing? And he made the decision that it was worth it, and he went for it. That's what presidents do. That's what we have them for. But specifically, the authorized use of military force was a way different scenario. Two, Pakistan is not, Osama bin Laden was not a Pakistani national, much less the head of state. He was technically stateless, but you could say he was a Saudi national. You could say he was an Afghanistan national. Pakistan, not really. And so, huge difference between Osama bin Laden and Nicolas Maduro, because Maduro was inside his own state. So we have a lot of different authority there. Saddam Hussein, little bit better, but we had the authorized use of military force, and Iraq was determined to be under the authorized use of military force. And so Saddam Hussein becomes a more valid target in that respect. He is he was the head of state, and we were unquestionably in armed conflict with the Iraq Defense Force, which he was in charge of, apprehending the general along with apprehending the head of state of Iraq. Again, whether you like it or not, is certainly a different case than apprehending Nicolas Maduro. But again, I think that we had perfect authority to do, I think within the United States, we have the president had the authority to do what he did. Let's see. And B says, Trump accomplishes a regime change with 0 U.S. casualties so far. It depends what we do next. And 0 civilian casualties, and people are still whining like little bitches. Unbelievable. I don't believe the 0 civilian casualties. This is the first time I've seen it. Barnes mentioned it. I hadn't seen that, but I wouldn't believe that anyway. But here's the thing. Civilian casualties happen. They don't seem to be massive, but they do happen. In this case, in this case, they don't seem to be massive. Palmyra Media, not about the drugs, but China's Baldo's off. Coltrane, Minnesota is about to be the next caliphate. Fledger Boy says, Robert, who decided let's blow up the Hugo Chavez Memorial? Trump Banster, another insider. Apparently we didn't do it. And that was my favorite thing, was that they blew up that commie's grave, but they didn't actually do that. Principled uncertainty. I never thought I would see Ringo interview Robert Barnes. Well, now you have. Now you have. Nazir says, yep, oil thicker than uncivil. Okay. The thick oil thing, oil refining has advanced quite a bit from the time that, thick oil is harder to refine. We refine shale oil. We have the ability to use fracking to extract oil. Like, the ability of us to refine oil has progressed so thoroughly that I don't quite buy into what Barnes is saying about the thing. Like, I get it. It's heavier oil. It has a specific type of refining process, and that equipment may not be in Venezuela, but that doesn't mean that it can't be refined and can't be refined economically. Debbie Tom Heartbeats Soul Stains says, can they move it to Florida since New York won't be friendly? No. Debbie also asks, chances will keep the House. I mean, does not look good for the Republicans. She also asks, why is Tulsi quiet and rarely seen for months? I have no idea. I don't follow that stuff that much. TMF Squid says, I seriously hope that the whole Venezuela and Maduro fiasco doesn't trigger a convention of states. It won't. I say that, but it won't. I do not trust the states would stay on topic. I think they would bring all our rights to it. Yes, a convention of states is the process by which states can determine to change the Constitution with absent Congress. And it is a constitutional convention can be a complete disaster because it really does open the door for pretty much anything. Taker 610 says, what did you make of the Superman movie? Given a foreign conflict is a major plot point and a superhero just grabs a world leader and kills him. I didn't watch it, but Superman isn't real. I don't know if you guys know this. Superman's not real. Holly Movie Star says, I saw New York court specializes in this type of crimes. Yeah, I made that point a little while back, specifically, again, with in regards to terrorism and enemy combatants, et cetera, et cetera. John Jelaine, can a judge be 100% proven beyond a shadow of a doubt to be free of a grudge and or predicated grudge or general bias? No, no one can. Nazer says, can Maduro countersue for damages? No. Maduro, there is actually a way to recover money for a malicious prosecution unless you make too much, and Maduro out incomes that really quickly. It's like if you have assets over like $2 million, you don't qualify. Long last name, Name, whatever. We already covered that one. Steven Watch It Chowda says, why are you hiding Kurt vids for members only, you coont? Well, because they're for members only. Become a member. Very simple. Principled Uncertainty says, the only justification for this I can muster is that Venezuela is infuriating to spell. So here's a question I have back for you. Why do you require justification? Right? Like, I think people get lost. How do I justify this? I don't think this is justified. It's not really your job to do that. We elect a president, and it's their job to justify it however the fuck they want. The question is, can they? Can they do that? Do they have the legal authority to do so? Everything else is just politics, baby. There's nothing else to it. Can they do it? If yes, then they do it. If no, and they do it, then we fix it somehow. But if you're looking for justification, unless you have the same exact information and perspective as the other person, you're not going to find it. Because you have different principles, morals, ideas, information, interpretations of that information than Trump or his team. So yeah, you're not going to, unless you're lockstep with them, you're not going to find justification. It's why I try and stay away from that. Like, whether or not I like something, again, is different from whether or not they can do something. I think a lot of people are looking for, can they do this? It seems illegal, blah, 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 blah. So that's what I focus on. Those are questions that are answerable. The other ones, I mean, are interesting for sure, but they're not answerable. They end up just being someone's perspective. And sometimes that's interesting, of course. Nazer says, you imagine Canada kidnapping Trump, Dems would have a Diddy party. Yeah, Art, I know what you think, but shockingly, you'll find that what you think isn't what everybody else thinks, which is exactly what I was just talking about, but in a different context. But I do see you whining about it in chat. I know, I got it. Let's see. I think, guys, that's about all I have for today. I was really happy to have Robert Barnes on. I need to take a rest. We will have the deposition of Lynette Preston coming up very soon this week, I believe. There's some other things I want to get around to, but we'll see how this all unfolds. I gotta figure out schedules, and I gotta figure out when we can do these things. So with that said, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me tonight. Please make sure to check out Robert Barnes and Viva Fry. Get more opinions on this. Follow everybody on Twitter, etc., etc. If you like the show, click like. If you don't like the show, click like anyway. If you really like the show, get a membership, join up. We do members only streams. They're fun sometimes. Last night's was a blast. And we'll probably have another one in the middle of the week here. I just have to figure out what the rest of the schedule is, what I'm going to cover, what I have time for, all of that stuff. Until then, though, let me get this outro song ready, and I will bid you all a very, very good night. Till next time. Oh, wait. Nazer says, night, you fig. Au revoir. Don't speak French on my stream. That's my job. I'm the gay one. All right, guys. Until next time, have a good night. Peace.
Oh, he drinks a fair bit, but you realize that it just helps get his noggin jogging along. With his glass by his side and his kids asleep tight, we'll hear some lost-splaining tonight. With his microphone muted, we'll laugh at this boomer until he explains it's all part of the plan. Watch his face become redder as he becomes madder, raging at idiots from Twitterland. From the white shores of Maine to the hills of Glenlivet, there's no one who explains the law better than Nick. So pour out a glass for the ones who have passed to make the law what we have now. Oh, his lady is fair, and she handles herself with the grace of one who has borne many children. As the wife of a lawman, she makes sure that he has the time and the place to provide for them there. So pour out an ardbeg, a bow, more of that frog. The spirits flow as the ones who get unemployed. So pour out a glass for the tea post on Twitter as we hear lost-splaining tonight. From the white shores of Nairn to the hills of Glenlivet, there's no one who explains the law better than Nick. So pour out a glass for the ones who have passed to make the law what we have now. Oh, the guests are all planet folks from Dundee to Drexel. They bring their perspective and spice to the mix. But the reason we're here and the one that we cheer is the one who is showcasing us his career. Get unemployed. So pour out a glass for the tea post on Twitter as we hear lost-splaining tonight. From the white shores of Nairn to the hills of Glenlivet, there's no one who explains the law better than Nick. So pour out a glass for the ones who have passed, to make the law what we have